Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Introverted in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 21, The Bloody Death Test. There was a moment of silence as the man, Ibiki Marino, snapped off with the rules of his test. Naruto found himself seated next to a Hyuga girl with raven hair and the usual white eyes of the clan, who seemed to be sheepishly fidgeting with her fingers. You will answer 10 questions, of which the 10th will be revealed at the end. Each of them will grant 2 points, just as 2 points will be removed if you are discovered cheating. Once you are discovered 5 times, you will be expelled. These rules will change with the passing of time, and they might become either laxer or stricter as the time goes by. Ibiki smiled savagely, widening his arms. You have 1 hour. Begin. And with that, Naruto turned to his test. He briefly glanced at the questions and then nearly gurgled in pain. There was no way he could answer any of those. He schemed to the last one, which simply stated, the last question will be available at the 45th minute of the test. Closing his eyes, he began to quietly drum his right fingers on the wood board, while his left hand went behind his back, fingers crossed and moving as he faked scratching his head. SOS. He used the Aoba code, before returning his gaze to the paper once more. Really, how was he supposed to know what the velocity of a kunao falling from a 4th floor was meant to be? And why did it matter together with the migratory path of ducks? 5 minutes had passed by in silence, before a meek voice whispered next to him. "En Naruto, you see can, copy from me," the Hyuga stammered out. Did he know her? He supposed he did. Wasn't she Hinata? He shook his head. He didn't doubt for a second her whispered words had been heard already by the Chiryunin proctors, and he wasn't going to cost his team points. He was sure Sai was going to provide support for this. Ibiki Marino watched calmly and coldly the genin who were trying to cheat. He frowned in disgust as he realized many were simply trying to write down whatever they could think of, rather than actually copy. The pink-haired genin of Konoha, one of Aoba's genin, was among them. He doubted even for a second that someone could have the answers to those tests. The raven-haired boy had instead been drawing on his test with a paintbrush. Really, the only one who had barely done anything had been the raven-haired Jinhiriki. He had used the right hand to mock a Morse code, forcing attention on that hand and the rhythm rather than on his left hand, that had gone behind his back to relay something to his teammates. He didn't take points. The method was sound and difficult to catch. Aoba had been a colleague. He had a mild way of getting into your head by just talking, and he didn't doubt for a second that his team was going to pass without casualties, at least the first part of the exam. He was actually barely holding himself from erupting with glee. His death test had finally been approved for usage. Sure, there were some limitations, but mostly, he was free to have fun. 10 minutes later, and one of his kunao struck one of the Chiryunin he had ordered to disguise as genin. It apparently struck the shinobi straight in the jugular, as the Chiryunin actually replaced himself with a prepared corpse. A seal array prepared beforehand dropped the body on the ground as blood sprayed out in its place. The red-tinted mist of blood shocked those nearby, eliciting a few wide-eyed stares of fright, and many suddenly found themselves on their feet. Sit down. Ibiki barked out immediately. Sakura had both her hands covering her mouth, while Sai remained unfazed and one of the few still seated. Naruto had gone up, kunao in hand. The Jinhiriki held onto the weapon for a moment more, before begrudgingly taking the seat again. The rest of the genin followed with hesitation. It had been one of Konoha's team to be killed, so they didn't know what to expect. Team 21, out. Ibiki then barked the command, as the rest of the genin assembled simply shuddered, their eyes filled with fear. Team 21, composed of the fake genin, actually stood up slowly while doing their best scared out of their wits imitation. I was nearly forgetting, Ibiki smirked as he licked his lips. You all signed a form before entering the exam. If you haven't read it before taking this test, then know this, you are imbeciles. It grants all proctors the ability to make their tests lethal. In this case, I have deemed it necessary that once you are discovered cheating I will also attack you once. Should you fail to dodge and should you die, that is not my concern. Naruto ground his teeth as he tried to recall the paper he had given back to his sensei. Yes, there had been a clause about potential deaths at the hand of the shinobi participating in the exam, but it hadn't pointed out specifically that the proctors themselves were enabled to kill. This exam suddenly reached a new level, especially with the fact that rules could change at a whim of the proctor. If the man wanted, he could attack those who swore, or spoke, or breathed too heavily. It wasn't a system fair to the one being tested, and yet, he looked to where the Hyuga girl was sitting, her face completely pale and her entire body shuddering. She was scared. Had she never seen death before taking the exam? He recalled hearing that being a Chiryunin didn't actually require having killed before. Still, this test was probably meant to shake out the too scared to think shinobi. They routinely lived with death and fear, and unless they could withstand this pressure. This wasn't said before. Asuna Kunoichi exclaimed then. The girl had her blonde hair tied in 4 short pigtails, and she was nervously holding a small fan with her free left hand. You said you would take points. You should warn us when you change the rules. The battlefield does not warn you when it changes. Ibiki snarled back. Do you think battles are fought with laws strictly placed? In 15 minutes or 15 seconds, I might change the rules again. You two, take the body of your comrade and get out of here. The rest, if you want to leave, then say so now. Maybe next year, you will find someone who makes a test with boring and easy to follow rules. Many teams just upped and left after that. The ones closest to the fake body were especially traumatized, and quite a few who didn't have the guts to go through with cheating soon followed afterwards. Those who had actually managed to get some answers remained, however, since they could just stop cheating and simply wait there for the end of the lesson. Ibiki smiled. He began to twirl a kunao in his right hand as the Suna Kunoichi sat back down and began to sweat. He kept his eyes trained on her for a moment more, before deftly throwing the kunao at a Kirigakuer genin who was trying to hastily copy from his neighbor since there was a big enough distraction with people leaving. The boy's throat was actually slashed with precision by the passing steel projectile. Blood oozed out as he barely held on the wound with his hands pressed against it, before falling on the ground with a dull thud. No one's exempted. I hope you know how to dodge, Ibiki smiled as he gestured for the exit. The 2 surviving Kiri shinobi actually left without giving a glance back to their teammate. Kiri shinobi weren't known of the bloody mist for no reason, and this was pretty tame compared to what they usually went through. A couple more cracked in the following minutes, as the scent of blood began to fill the air. Nobody made a move to remove the corpses after all, be they real or fake. Naruto watched with fascination as the Hyuga near him seemed to be breathing erratically, actually scared both of bringing her hand up and at the same time of remaining in the room. She was apparently torn and fighting herself over what to do. He didn't know much about the Hyugas, but considering they might be a pretty big clan in Konoha, it was probable she didn't want to look weak. He shook his head slowly. The girl should have left when the time had come. Never mind the fact he still had to receive any answers back from one of his teammates. A small slithering of black caught Ibiki's attention, and as he deftly threw one kunao at the strange ink snake, he narrowed his eyes. He began to look towards the paintbrush-wielding genin. He knew it had been him, but he hadn't caught him on the act yet. So, he waited. Time kept on slowly passing by. He turned to gaze at the Jinhiriki, who was now writing furiously on his exam paper. He smirked. The snake had been a decoy. Very well, he finally said as the teams had dwindled down enough, smirking as he watched all look at him like rabbits caught in a trap. Now the explosive tags beneath your seats will activate. If you try and move from your seat, in an effort to dodge while I attack you, they will explode. They are directional, so they will only hopefully take out you. Of course they are also linked to those of your teammates. So should yours explode, theirs would soon follow. Kankuro began to sweat. He couldn't leave for the bathroom then. He couldn't copy. Gaara was going to kill him. He began to mutter prayers as he watched a few of the students raise their hands to surrender again. A shinobi of grass was the first to stand after the proctor nodded to him. The next instant, a twin explosion set off, turning to a bunch of gore and blood his 2 teammates. The shinobi looked with wide and disbelieving eyes at the pieces of flesh and muscle that once were his friends. The rest of the class watched with fear, as those who had also raised their hands to surrender quickly brought them down. I was forgetting, if you surrender now, then your teammates will still die. Giving up halfway on a battlefield usually means the death of your teammates after all, the grass shinobi screamed incoherently, as he tried to charge ahead at the Chiryunin only to be beheaded by the two closest proctors with a swift blow. There was now blood everywhere, thick and coppery scented. Naruto felt himself becoming incredibly queasier as time passed. If they couldn't surrender, then Sakura was in agony. She couldn't believe they were doing this as an examination. She had told her parents it was going to be something easy. She had even dusted off her books and had crammed a few hours of studying in her program too. This, she felt the need to retch, but she couldn't stand, not without making her teammates die. She clenched her fists and breathed deeply. Stealing her gaze, she watched both Naruto's and Sai's gaze move to her and then to the other. They smiled for a moment, and then nodded. She nodded back with a small smile. There was no way they were going to die here, in an exam. The rules will change again and again before the end of the exam, but know this, the last question will either see your entire team leave alive, or fail. Unless you surrender, in which case you walk away, but your teammates die. This is the true face of the shinobi mission Chiryunins will have to take. Feel the tension in the air, smell the blood of your fellow genin. You are no longer children from this moment hence. Ibiki then waited. Soon, he watched as teammates turned against teammates in an effort to decide whether they would stay or not. Time passed by with an increasing panic and tension, as a few more, especially from Kirigakure, choose to surrender and let their teammates die. Finally, for the last question, Ibiki took a step forward. Naruto watched as the Hyuga seemed to tense, before suddenly relaxing. Naruto-kun, Hinata whispered with bated breath. If I die, know that I... Silence. Ibiki yelled to the room, freezing the girl on her spot. Naruto raised an eyebrow perplexed, before turning to look at what the proctor had to say. This last question, it is an all or nothing. If a member of your team does not want to take this question, he or she may be able to leave with her teammates. If you answer correctly, you will pass no matter what your total score was. If you answer wrongly, you will die. He licked his lips. The last time I did this test, not a single genin who took the question survived. I give, Ami's voice had barely been heard, but was soon muted by Shikamaru's quiet usage of his clan's technique. The Nara wasn't going to risk it. Konoha was based on teammates. It had always been. The way the man had worded the sentence furthermore gave him credit. Being able to leave and leaving were different. A few more genin decided to leave. He watched as group after group left the room, nothing strange happening to them as they walked through the doors, until in the end they remained considerably less than when they had started. From the 29 teams of Konoha, only Team 5, 8, 9, 10, and 13 remained. From Suna, there was only one team made of the red-haired guy. From Iwagakure, 2 teams were currently standing confidently on their seats. From Omegakure, Takigakure, Otagakure, and Kusagakure 1 team each had survived. The majority had either died earlier or was currently being herded off. From 153 genin, they were now reduced to barely 36, only 12 teams out of 51. Thankfully they had not gone to Mist. It had been years since an exam in Mist ended with more than 3 survivors, out of the 100 that usually went to take their exams there. He wondered why his sensei had forced him to accept this, or if he knew of the dangers of the exams from the very beginning. Death seemed counterproductive, especially when it came to their forces, but maybe it was the examiner himself. Maybe the ones killed of Konoha hadn't actually been killed. The array might have had some sort of transportation thing inked on it, and that placed the genin elsewhere. Or maybe they were all false genin, and in truth his team was the only one truly participating in the exam. Shikamaru sighed as Ibiki clapped his hands together. Those of you who have remained. Congratulations. Ibiki laughed. The man laughed heartily as he began to clap stronger, soon followed by the rest of the proctors. You have passed the first exam, the death test. To test your resolve in face of certain doom, to be a true shinobi. To acquire information, to battle against your fears and your fright. Well done, shinobi and kunoichi. Well done. Sakura sat there numbly. Next to her, a corpse cleanly dissected in half was still bleeding all over her right shoulder. She hadn't surrendered because she had been frozen in her position, with her eyes wide. What had she done? What were they doing? This was madness. This was utter madness. They were in a room filled with blood and corpses, and people were clapping their hands at them. They were clapping and the one in the middle was laughing. You may now stand, the arrays have been deactivated. As soon as the man said that, practically everyone stood on their feet, looking at each other and leaving to near his or her teammates. A few of the proctors began to clean away the bodies, while Sakura just stood there, frozen, until a hand settled on her shoulder. Cherry, Sai spoke calmly. Come with me. Ah. Ha, hi, she muttered back half-dazed, gently gripping Sai's arm to get up on her feet. She moved out behind him, reaching for a corner of the room devoid of proctors or other genin. Naruto watched with interest as they seemed to be opening a window, probably to let the air change itself. He didn't understand why he was starting to like the smell. He felt the gaze of Gaara on him, and turned to look once more at the red-haired Suna shinobi. They locked eyes. Shukaku, the youngest. The last to be born and the one tail of the desert. Where he goes, misery follows. Be it pain or suffering, the harsh winds and the scorching sand of the desert will provide it. The Kyuubi was gleeful as he spoke. We turned to glass a village filled with sins once. His sand covered the amoral humans, my fire burned their wicked flesh, and our winds nurtured the flames of purification. It was a pretty thing to watch, and it made the most delicious noise when it broke to pieces. Excuse me, a voice unfamiliar with Naruto spoke near him, forcing him to turn his gaze towards a blushing short red-haired girl from Kyuzagakuer with crimson eyes. She was wearing a pair of black-rimmed glasses, and a brown jacket that didn't at all hide her underlining black shirt. I wondered, could you help me? He watched as the Kusa Kunoichi seemed to fidget for a moment, before extending a hand. I'm Karen Uzumaki. Do you know where I can find a cheap blacksmith that sells shinobi supplies? She smiled at him. His heart stopped. This looked too good to be true. I'm Naruto, he replied with a slight smile. What a coincidence, I'm an Uzumaki too. Really? Karen's eyes widened. What was your father's name? Maybe we're 3 times removed cousins or something. It's my mother, he stammered out. Kushina, she was called Kushina. Karen scrunched her face for a moment, before shaking her head. Nope, haven't heard of her. Well. I didn't know there were any Uzumaki left in Konoha, not after the destruction of Uzushio, many were quite bitter with. Ahem, Sakura coughed, her eyes suddenly getting her sharpness back. Naruto? Why are you talking with a foreign kunoichi? Sai's ears perked up. He actually was more surprised it was the kunoichi part that was a problem to Sakura, and not the foreign, at least, if body language was of any indication. Kusa and Konoha are allies, Karen remarked. And if this first exam is like this, it's better to have allies than enemies, no. Is this the diplomatic attitude of your country? Sakura smiled sweetly, venom dripping down her words. She closed her eyes and cocked her head to the side, while within her a raging voice was starting to scream about murdering the bitch. Sakura? Naruto asked perplexed. She's an Uzumaki like me? He exclaimed then. She's family. Naruto schooled his features a second later. The Kyuubi hadn't been whispering anything about her being filled with evil intentions, but then again it was also the fox's choice on what to tell him or not, so maybe she was lying. Still. Sakura's eyes softened at those words, only for Karen's face to morph into a light grin. Never before had the crimson-eyed girl thought about it, but she could read their chakra emissions, and since every little bit helped on the long run. We're probably, at the very least, cousins thrice removed, she pointed out. We could, she blushed, restart the sea. Shannaro! Sakura screamed, nearly jumping on the red-haired girl who faked trembling and hiding behind Naruto's back. Sakura? Naruto asked once more, this time worried. Are you all right? That. Stop hiding behind him. The pink-haired girl snarled, a tick mark clearly visible on her forehead. He has such a strong back, Karen cooed. Her hands gently touching Naruto's shoulders. So, stiff, maybe you would need. Naruto fidgeted and slightly blushed at such a display of affection, before schooling his features once more. It wouldn't do to lower one's guard around a flirt. It was a common technique used by Kunoichi after all, wasn't it? Why you? Sakura's breath began to grow shorter as she seemed to be panting in order to keep her rage in check. Get your hands away from my teammate, you whore! Sakura! Just as Naruto exclaimed that, a figure entered through the window. A purple-haired Kunoichi with a fishnet shirt and a brown trench coat smiled, waving her right hand as she held in her mouth a dango stick. Her scandalous mini-skirt was dark brown, and as she boringly began to twirl a kunao, she exclaimed. Well then, you the brats who survived. She smiled as she licked her lips. My name is Anko Mitarashi. I'll be your proctor for the next part of the exams. I'll cut your numbers down to 9, just you wait and see. She turned towards Ibiki, a feral smile on her lips. You went ballistic, huh? It was fun, I admit, the head of the torture and interrogation unit replied. They were squirming in their seats and a few pissed in their pants too. Ah. Anko sighed melodramatically. I knew I should have taken the first bout rather than the second. The woman gave one more look around, taking in the genin faces. Suddenly, her eyes glinted dangerously as she licked her lips and began to slowly walk forward. She stopped a few steps away from Sakura, eyeing her appraisingly up and down. Look who's here. My budding apprentice. The fact Sakura was the one to actually answer that told volumes about whether the girl knew or not about this. I watched the security videos. You're wicked. Didn't think you'd have it in you with your curriculum, but don't worry. The moment you're out of the Genin Corps I'll take good care of you. Anko coyly spoke, blowing a light amount of air on Sakura's ear and turning the girl scarlet. Anyway. The purple-haired woman said once more, moving away from the stammering Sakura who was mumbling apologies for some reason to her teammates, all off to training ground 44. Follow the leader. And she was off. Before Sakura could stammer out anything more than half-stuttered apologies, the rest of the genin had already begun to run out of the window behind the crazy instructor. Sai just pushed Sakura, and that was the thing the girl needed to start running. Naruto was behind them as they left the room, the proctors grinning like mad the moment the last of the genin left. Anyone found out? Ibiki remarked, as the Konohagakure genin teams he had killed suddenly dropped down from their spots on the walls or on the ceiling. No, one of them remarked. We'll be moving to the training area 44 then sir, to shadow the teams. Do that, Ibiki nodded, watching as the group of Chiryunin left once more. The corpses of the enemy's village genin were all sacked, their blood and bodies would help the research department. I suppose the Hokage will be happy. It was a nice catch this year, sir, another of the proctors remarked with a small smile. I remember my own exam. We lost a few too, didn't we? Quite a bit, his colleague remarked. All randomly drawn from the Genin Corps. Then again, give so that they may give back in turn, right? Yeah, the first Chiryunin shook his head. Yeah, he added then bitterly. The forest of death loomed over the horizon as a giant mixture of plants, venomous creatures, and flesh-eating monsters. No genin could step inside and hope to survive the night. No one was so mad to try. Shikamaru hoped against all odds that there was the distinctive chance to renounce the exam before starting the second part. He wanted to stop. He wanted to go in a corner and remain there. The fact the civilian girl, Ami, was completely different from the other old man and was shivering in fright didn't bode well at all. Choji had to carry her all the way to the training ground in question, while the girl was screaming in fright every step of the way. I don't want to. She pleaded, as she was finally released on the ground, in the midst of the other genin who had dutifully followed the proctor. Very well. Gather round. Anko widened her arms as she smirked. The forest of death is in front of you. In here, you will spend 5 days and 5 nights, you and your teammates, trying to fight for your continued survival. Here are the rules. She brought up a single purple-colored scroll from her leather jacket. There are a total of 10 scrolls within the forest, she smiled then, looking like some sort of crazy maniac with a thirst for blood. To pass, you must gather one of the scrolls per person. You will not be disqualified should one of your teammates die, but you will be disqualified should 5 days elapse without you obtaining a scroll. You must present yourself to the tower at the center of the training ground at the end of the 5th day, and not before. You will scavenge, survive, and fight within this forest filled with dangerous beasts, and since there are 10 scrolls you will either ally yourself with others or be mercilessly slaughtered. The woman cackled. I don't want to participate. Ami screeched. There were tears running down her cheeks. Please, I don't. Shikamaru saw it coming, but could only widen his eyes as he saw the kunai strike through the girl's right eye, slam in her brain and kill her on the spot as blood oozed out from the wound copiously. He froze and opened his mouth slightly, in shock. Chuji actually let his pack of chips fall on the ground at such a display. To give up halfway is death, didn't Ibiki teach you so in the previous exam? Anko laughed, before letting the kunai whirl. Seems like your team will start with only 2 persons inside, she remarked towards Shikamaru, who nodded numbly. There went his decision to leave. As well as Ami. The civilian girl had always been a sort of second-rate kunoichi. She was similar to Ino, because she screamed just like her or expected them to do things just like her, yet at the same time she wasn't at all like the Yamanaka. She didn't have any clan jutsu to help her, and in this battle royal, she would have been a weight. But to kill her? That was harsh. Oh right. I was nearly forgetting this little rule. Anko exclaimed, catching everyone's attention once more. You must present yourself in a 3-man team when you deliver the scrolls, unless you are the last and the 10th one, or you can present yourself in a 4-man team. So, to recap, 10 of you, either 3 teams of 3 members and 1 extra or 2 teams of 3 members and 1 of 4. There is a difference. No, 5 members or 8 members things. There will be 3, 4, 7, 9, or 10. Understood. There was silence. Not even the wind could do something against the tension that was now thick in the air. Naruto and Sai had instinctively moved near Sakura, their hands already on their weapons. The girl too was subconsciously moving her left hand to one of the explosive tags her sensei had gifted her. She had a feeling she was going to use them sooner than later. You will be moved to a random gate now, good luck, and hope you die quickly. Naruto gave one last look at the Hyuga girl, who seemed to be trying to say something to him but couldn't, before gazing for just a second to another Hyuga boy, who seemed to be pointing his finger at the girl and receiving frowns and shaking heads from the rest of his teammates, a girl with a pair of buns on her head and the guy who had talked with them before and was a taijutsu expert. We must find 3 scrolls, then wait and move to the tower, Sakura muttered as they stood in front of their gates. That is the strategy everyone else is going to adopt, Naruto whispered back. Some might prefer to lower the enemies, killing the rest of the teams to look for the scrolls with more ease, Sakura frowned. We must be careful. They could try and create a double 4 team, and that would actually stop 2 other shinobi from participating in the end exam. Meaning that we would have to kill a shinobi from one of the 4-man teams, Naruto said. Chuji and Shikamaru could ally themselves with Kiba's team and 1 more. Team 5, or Team 9, Sakura stated. It's pretty clear-cut that way. They are both from Konoha. The only way to fight that would be a 9-man team plus 1. It's more in-depth than what I thought it was, Naruto winced. It forces you to ally, and at the same time it obliges you to choose who to let pass and who not to. It's not like they can expect to find all 10 scrolls after all, and smaller teams cover more area quickly. Mobility versus safety versus objective completeness, Sakura retorted. We should begin by finding 3 scrolls, hiding them and feigning indifference, but the Hyuga are going to be a bitch. Pale eyes can see through walls, Sai quipped in. Preemptive attack or alliance would work. So it would depend on which side they are on, Sakura retorted. They could both go with Shikamaru Hizunara, and they're renowned for being smart. No, Naruto shook his head. I read the Hyuga boy's lips. He asked his teammates to attack and kill Hinata's team. They are never going to be allies. The older team is a more decisive viability for Shikamaru, if he can get them to work with him and 1 more team, Sakura mumbled. We need to find allies. Not with Suna, Naruto shook his head. Whatever happens, we avoid Suna like the plague. I still haven't asked you, Sakura said, looking at Naruto with a bit of apprehension. What's the deal with the redhead boy? Jinhiriki, Naruto replied quickly. He's one, just like me, so his power must be off the scales. No fighting him. He's at least on crap 7 to be safe. Sakura nodded thoughtfully. What about your family? The girl snorted. You agreed to help her, didn't you? After this exam, I think, Naruto replied slowly. And we could ally ourselves with the older Hyuga team and the Kusa team. Why? Because she says she's family? Naruto, you can't trust people like this. Sakura bitterly snarled. I'm not, he widened his eyes, before shaking his head. But if she is, then I would never forgive myself. And if we can't find enough scrolls, then we might be able to win against them without bloodshed since they're apparently weak. Do we fight to kill? Sai queried. Even Konoha shinobi. That's the problem, isn't it? Naruto answered. We need to verify if they have a scroll before, and only then do we attack. We don't have the Hyuga eyes, so we need one of their teams on our side. And the rest of the shinobi in the other teams. His voice suddenly grew weak. Oh shit. They are all going to try and get a Hyuga on their team. Sakura paled as she realized that. They can see through walls and things. They are the apt card to play, and the only way to ensure their help is to slaughter the rest of the Konoha teams. If you can't ally with your friends, then your enemies are your only choice. Shit, Sakura cussed. Shit. Double shit. The bell rang to the right of their gate, as the doors of steel slowly opened inwardly. Quickly, they began to run in formation with Sai as the point, the boy drawing a horde of mice on a parchment. With a pulse of chakra, the mice scattered from his parchment to the bushes and trees around them. Eyes enabled. Sai exclaimed, moving backwards and leaving the point to Naruto. We move in formation. Head for the river, fill the flasks, retreat, and start looking for the Hyuga team, Naruto commented fast. If we can't find them, we begin our search for the scrolls. Understood. Both Sakura and Sai replied. Move the radio frequency to channel 994, keep communication to a minimum, Naruto ordered, once more, sweat already coming down his face as the tension of the situation settled in. With a deft jump, he avoided a nest of poisonous snakes that darted out in answer to the tremor of their running. Keep to the undergrowth, he buzzed. Sai, overwatch from eyes. Negative. We will reach the river by night if we keep up this speed, Sakura commented. Do we have poisons? Affirmative, Sai remarked. General adrenaline pills too. Guys, Naruto said firmly, his eyes shining ahead with determination. We can do this. Of course, Sakura replied with a small smile. Never said no, dickless, Sai quipped. But I will to your homosexual advances. Please don't make them. Naruto groaned. Sakura held her fist clenched but steady. She'd start a tally count. By the time they were out of there, she'd deliver the beating of all beatings to Sai. But not until they were out of there. Not until then, because they were going to make it, no matter what. They weren't going to die there. She still had to decide what to do with Naruto after all. She had kissed him on the cheek, and he hadn't said anything about it. Was it a no? A tacit, let's fake nothing happened? If something was there, however, wouldn't that mean she would have to change teams? She felt a pair of hands push her to the side, just in time to avoid a leech as big as a giant dog fall down on the spot she would have been a moment before. Concentrate now, Cherry, Sai said calmly. Think porn of me and Naruto later. She felt heat reach her cheeks as the images just appeared. She wasn't a pervert. Sai. She hissed. She shook her head then, a smile on her face. I'm making a tally. When this is over, prepare for the check. This one? She'd count it triple. Sai just quietly nodded, before resuming his duty. He would have to be careful. He had another mission within the forest after all, one that Danzo-sama had specifically given to him to prove once more his loyalty to Root. The Hyuga heiress, she had to die. Chapter 22, The Blood of the Leaves. 2 days had passed since white-masked shinobi had come to take her in an underground complex. She hadn't gone alone, the mud face had been there with her all the way. The only ray of sunshine was that Sasuke-kun had also joined them beneath the ground. She smiled as she checked her hair and adjusted her kunoichi vest to show just a bit more of skin around her arms. Her chest had still to grow, there was no way she'd convince the last of the Uchiha with her flatness. It had been 2 days. The Churyunin exams had already begun, and yet no reason had been forthcoming on why they had been taken in the dead of the night and brought deep in some unknown place. They had even sedated her, telling her to bring enough clothes to last for an entire month. It was as she entered the common area that separated her room from that of Kiba that she realized there no longer was only the Mutt and Sasuke-kun in the common room. There were 3 Kyuzagakuer ninjas too, all 3 apparently looking at one another with a surprised look. They seemed to be ranting and pointing their fingers at a group of jounin that was now settled in a corner, all sporting Konoha forehead protectors and wearing either white masks or umbu ones. 2 jounin were speaking to the trio of Kyuzagakuer genin, of which one was a Tsunagakuer shinobi with half his face masked by a cloth, while the other seemed like a thin and gaunt-looking man. "Quiet," the masked jounin said once more. "You should be thankful Konoha took the effort to safeguard yourself from an S-rank shinobi such as Orochimaru of the Sunin. I thought I was done for," one of the Kyuzagakuer shinobi remarked. "Still, it was no way of treating us allies. Sacked and pulled Kami knew where." "Really? It does not matter at all," Takao, one of the Kyuzagakuer's jounin retorted calmly. "Would you have preferred death, to a moment of discomfort?" Nearly all teams were failed specifically because of the risk there was. We jounins were all together in this decision. "Sensei, but then why did they let Karen's team pass?" "Takao, Karen is a censor and her jounin volunteered her for this. She will be useful to our allies of Konoha. Furthermore, the training ground is being shadowed by as many jounin and umbus as there can be. Some of your teammates jounin have taken the task of alerting our own village and send reinforcements. We were forewarned only a few hours ago ourselves, and so the message will have to be delivered as quickly as possible. We do not know when Orochimaru will strike, but he is not an S-rank threat for just any reason. Tsunagakuer's shinobi army," here it was the half-masked man who spoke, "will make haste to reach Konoha in time to and provide assistance to our allies. Should Orochimaru's objectives be concluded, there would without a doubt be another war. Think about this, you insolent whelps. Do you have any idea what a war means? It means senseless death. So be thankful you were transported here, rather than be blown to bits. And be thankful they had the Fuinjutsu knowledge to do so." The 3 Kyuzagakuer ninjas looked properly chastised, before the kunoichi of the trio softly whispered. "Why are we here, sensei?" "Ah," the Kyuzagakuer jounin spoke then. "For cooperation with Konoha. We will be trying a new training regime with one of their teams. You were just lucky to be chosen first. They did manage to get you out of the room quickly after all." The kunoichi sniffled slightly, before nodding. "It was horrible. It was nothing more than a test. One that you failed by surrendering," the jounin snapped back. "I am ashamed to admit I hoped you would not. The genin of nowadays, there were only 12 deaths in the end, 3 of which were yours while the real ones were of Kiri with a few from AIM. The first one was even faked by Konoha to get the game started." The jounin's tone was of disapproval. "I saw more death during my own Churyunin exam in Uegakuer, in the caves of gnawing death." "We're sorry sensei," the kunoichi whispered. "We'll do better next time." "I hope so." The jounin barked back angrily. "I truly hope so." Ami stopped giving attention to the scene, slowly making her way to the corner where Sasuke was looking with murder in his eyes towards the 3 Kyuzagakuer genin. He had his right arm in a cast, and his left clutched a walking stick. The last Uchiha was probably seizing the other genin, and Ami couldn't help but swoon over the way the dark and raven boy watched everyone with keen eyes. He seemed to smile as she walked closer, and her heart skipped a beat. "Sasuke-kun," she said with a slight hope, "how do you feel today?" "HN, he grunted back at her. "Where's the mutt?" he snapped. Bragging to another weakling. "Ah, I don't know," she coyly said, bringing her arms behind her back and letting her left leg behind her right one. She tried her best shy approach as she whispered softly, she tried to bring emphasis to her lips and curves as she spoke. Would you like to eat something with me? I already ate, Sasuke replied, rolling his beautiful dark eyes, before wobbling away and leaving her to clasp her hands together and sigh in a dreamy-like state. He really was a dark and broody prince who just needed someone to melt his heart. Today he had spoken more to her than in the entire month before. It was progress. She was going to show that Sakura who, in the end, was going to win over Sasuke-kun's heart. It was then that she saw the smiling face of the Konoha Chiryunin, Kabuto Yakushi. She was going to ask him counsel. He had such bright ideas about excellent spots for dates after all. Hiruzen Sarutobi and Danzo Shimura were both standing near a water sphere that floated gently in the middle of a wide circular room. Inoichi Yamanaka was manning the long-distance thought communicator, as hurrying Chiryunins and a few Umbu moved around frenetically. We have confirmation for Genin Karen Uzumaki. She is from Kusa, an Umbu remarked. We can take her out of the list. Operative Wolf was taken out of persona by Operative Snake. It is implied the correct exchange of signals was given. Team 8 is to be guided towards Bait Area Gamma, a Jounin said then. A map of the training ground opened on the table. They are not on the list. Have Shadow Stalkers 5 and 6 take care that, Hiruzen said quickly. Danzo, what of Root? Operatives are in the know, the bandaged shinobi remarked. Inkpot has been warned. What of? The Yami of shinobi sighed in exasperation. What of Super Pervert? He's in position at the tower, Hiruzen answered calmly. If Orochimaru will strike, he will be ready to intervene. Good, Danzo acquiesced. Control Tower, report on Jounin status. The Suna Jounin is headed towards Sunagakure unhindered, Inoichi remarked. The Duds have encountered hostilities from missing Nin from Kiri and Aim. The Kusa Jounin. The head of the Yamanaka clan frowned. He has stopped. Duds are converging, his escort blinked off the radar, Inoichi whispered. They term no, it's back. Wait a moment, Inoichi made a hand gesture. Understood. They encountered hostiles but terminated them. One knocked him unconscious for a moment. He will continue as planned. Hiruzen sighed out the breath of relief. Everything was going according to plan. Orochimaru would not be granted permission to take Naruto out of the village, nor of freeing the Kyuubi within. The death toll would be catastrophic, and if it happened in the middle of the shinobi exams, the public loss of support from the daimyo's court would be unprecedented. They would not be pulling punches. The enemy could be anyone. Orochimaru was an S-rank threat, something akin to a cage, a one-man army, and because of that the entire village had mobilized as if they were on a war period. The genin will not be shipped out from Root for an entire month, Danzo sighed. More food will be needed. Thankfully you have a shop as a front for your little complex, Hiruzen dryly remarked. I was surprised when Tsubaki told me. I was even more surprised when I nearly killed her, Danzo muttered back. To think Naruto stepped in a moment after, you were lucky. You could have told me who you would be sending. I had to assume she was in league with Mizuki coming for revenge and was blackmailing me. You are not convincing anyone, Danzo, Hiruzen rolled his eyes, taking one more puff of smoke. But it hardly matters. You are not curious as to how I knew. It was hardly a secret back in the days it was constructed. I just dug deeper and further away, you followed the breadcrumbs I suppose. In more ways than one, Hiruzen chuckled. To think you would uproot the darkness, Danzo lowered his gaze to the water sphere, which now showed Naruto currently taking the bark of a tree to make some small splinters. He couldn't help but smile. Smart boy. Sawdust. Hiruzen replied, looking at the image. Is he making a Konoha tube? I taught him the trick. A wooden cylinder carved from a tree, filled with sawdust and then sparked with a bit of coal within. Danzo was actually chatty, for once. Nearly no chakra required. It detonates on contact if done properly. Otherwise it combusts and sparks. Poor forest, Hiruzen chuckled. Move to Sector A9, the Sand Aim ordered to the one operating the water sphere, which suddenly changed to display Niji Hyuga. This could be one of Orochimaru's peripheral targets, the third Hokage spoke calmly. His team checks out. Yosh! The green spandex wearing Jounin exclaimed, from his corner of the room. I personally checked them before the start of the exam, Hokage-sama. And no one can copy my Lee's fire of youth. Alright, the old shinobi brought his right hand to his forehead, before ordering another change of imagery. What of Hinata Hyuga? She's safe, the Umbuteiker remarked from his spot, his back against a wall. Tenzo is with her. He will do his best to remain in close proximity with the Jinhiriki. He will provide assistance should it be needed. He was the only one that could fool the Byakugan after all, Hiruzen remarked. Hopefully, he will not slip during the 5 days. He is a trained operative of Umbu, the Teika seemed affronted as he spoke. Umbu do not slip. For our own safety, Hiruzen said, I hope so too. Danzo, meanwhile, remained quiet. He had known from the very moment he had ordered Sai's mission after all. It was long due time. Naruto's test would truly begin in the middle of the forest, where no one could help him. What would he do then? He couldn't help but smile slightly. Would he kill his friend, completing the emotion-deadening training? Or would he not and thus watch as Sai killed the entire team of Konoha ninjas the Hyuga heiress belonged to? In both cases, he would win. With the air problem already destabilized, he would slither closer to the other boy, and offer his help in claiming the right to become of the main branch. From there, he would add the Hyuga to his list of clans below his very banner, and that would make all the difference on the long run. Still, he watched once more the water sphere morph. We have a breach in Sector Beta 7, Inoichi said quickly. Orochimaru has entered. There are 5 clones of him. Have the teams on standby. Hiruzen barked. Where is he headed? 1 Orochimaru per Hyuga, Hokage-sama. 1 on Team 13 and 2 more are headed towards the tower itself. The 2 headed to the towers are clones, possibly to distract us. Dangerous, but not the true problem. So he either went to one of the Hyuga or to Naruto. Biting on his pipe, Hiruzen finally gave a single curt nod. Begin Operation Mongoose. Anumbu gave a small look to another one, just for a single instant. The moment the 2 Umbu's eyes met there was an acknowledging look. No one else dared to even think about it. The Sandaime had personally named the operation after all, and Danzo simply remained quiet. As silence and tension crept through the operative room deeply rooted within the bowels of the root headquarters, at the same time 3 genin were currently setting up camp for the night. Their faces were covered in mud. Their clothes garnished with leaves and dirty branches. They were squatted down on one of the highest available branches, one of the thickest, that could easily rival an apartment's width. It even seemed bigger than Naruto's one-room apartment to boot. The sun was dying over the horizon, and no contact had been done with any team. It suited them just fine. Sai carefully drew a few more mice, letting the ink dry as he carefully tucked the prepared parchment away. He began to paint on the side of the tree, creating what looked like a lion on the trunk, with its paws both raised to one side and the mouth opened, as if to fire flames. Tonight's dinner, rations, Sakura muttered awkwardly as she handed over the small sticky bars that tasted like a mixture of cardboard and mud. Joy. You stole my comment, Cherry, Sai answered calmly. He ate his own ration in 2 quick gulps, swallowing it down with 3 careful sips of water. First watch is mine. I'll take second, Naruto said back. You caught the food from the river, Sakura, he added watching the strange-looking black fish. You get sleep first. I don't know how to cook it, she replied awkwardly. I don't even think it's edible. It isn't, Sai said. It's venomous. We can use his teeth as darts however. The fish has teeth. Naruto mumbled shaking his head. I'm turning in for the night. Night Sai, Sakura. Night, Dickless. Cherry, keep your hands away from his butt, Sai deadpanned a moment later. Yes, I know you wanted to touch it. Is this a snide remark because I stole your comment? Sakura asked perplexed. Yes, Sai acquiesced with a surprisingly serious nod. Does it work? No, you fail horribly at it, Sakura sighed as she moved closer to the trunk. Good night, Sai. Sai just stood there numbly for a moment more, before narrowing his eyes and slowing down his breath. His eyes traveled to the surroundings of their camp. Steel wire and shuriken launchers had been placed by Sakura, and a few precious explosive tags lined the spots only a shinobi could reach. Thin-looking strips of paper flung harmlessly from the branches around them, painted black to better hide during the night. Nodding to himself, he jumped back, grabbed the bed cover and used it to hide all three of them with the ear-ank jutsu needed to pass off as harmless bark. The other two teammates of his breathed slowly, forcing their bodies to slow down and then fall asleep. Their lives were in his hands. Never mind the fact he knew the previous test had been false, something used only to fool those remaining. The exams would increase tension, but nobody sane of his mind would outright kill all the genin participating. One or two choice pieces could be scuttled away, but nearly the entire participating force? He supposed his orders tied directly to that. He had to kill the Hyuga heiress and acquire the Byakugan eyes from her body. He couldn't do it during the day, but if he managed to get his team to cooperate with another and face off the youngest one, a fight mishap could always happen. He flinched as he heard a branch rustle slightly. Sure, it could have been anything from a snake to a spider, passing for one of his ink mice making a noise more, but then he felt it, the slight drain on his chakra coming less. One of his ink mice had been destroyed. He froze as he heard a slight dry chuckle rise in the fresh night air. He couldn't see, but he knew the feeling of bloodlust. He felt his very skin crawl and shiver, and even with his emotions nearly deadened, fear, pure and unabashed fear ran through his entire body, making his heart beat painfully fast. Tell me a story, little mouse, while I feast on your entrails. I am the snake that devours your kin. I am the eyes that look at you from the night's cloak. I am your predator, and you are my prey. Golden eyes slowly appeared from the very bark of the tree's branch. A pale-skinned shinobi with long raven hair and a jounin flak jacket smiled wickedly as it licked its lips. He wasn't an enemy shinobi. Danzo-sama had told him a clash with Orochimaru would be possible. That the case, he had to ensure the Snake Sunin did not reveal to Naruto the truth, whatever it was, he didn't know. I can see you. Orochimaru took a single step forward, with practiced ease. The thin wire of steel was voluntarily pushed down, that much Sai had no doubt about it. Suddenly, needles and kunai flew in the air, hitting the branch and the shinobi in question. The Snake Sunin didn't even bother to dodge, letting the projectile of steel wound him as thick brown blood began to ooze out. I have found you, it smiled one last time, before disappearing into a cracked form of mud and dirt. It had been a bunshin. A Doton bunshin, but still, why did Orochimaru not attack? Sai didn't know. He wasn't even startled when Naruto's voice cut in from his side. Sai? Who was that man? The trap had to have woken up Naruto and Sakura clearly, as both were now tense and still at his side. A jounin. Orochimaru, Sai whispered. Orochimaru of the Sunin, he's after us. Shit. Sakura cussed, standing up immediately. We have to leave for the tower. Wait. Naruto snapped back, grabbing the girl by the wrist and pinning her back down. He managed just in time as a giant gale of wind slammed against the bark, tearing apart a chunk as wide as a human body from it. Splinters and sawdust covered the trio, as they jumped the next moment up in formation, reaching for the top of tree as a volley of kunai rigged with explosive tags detonated behind them. Sai pressed his hands in the chakra technique to activate the ink lion behind them, which roared and sprouted fire from his mouth against a container filled with alcohol and bits of rags. The explosion brought the flames to fall on the bushes beneath, lighting up a fire soaked by petrol and oil that quickly spread, granting light. Sakura narrowed her eyes, throwing a volley of shurikens against a glinting light to the team's left. The flying projectiles hit a metallic arm, as an Omegakuur shinobi emerged from the thick leafy branches. Exhaling, the genin literally delivered a noxious purple fume their way. A quick hand sign of Naruto, however, and from one of his pouches came undone the barbed wire. Using it as a whip, letting chakra run through its entire body to straighten it, he lashed at the throat. As another Omegakuur shinobi came from behind Naruto, kunai in hand to backstab the dark-haired teen in midair. Sakura spun her body around and threw one of the explosive tags at the incoming poisonous cloud. Sai formed 3 ink needles, before hitting with deadly precision the backstabber's eyes and making the shinobi scream as his eyes were mercilessly ravaged by the chakra-infused ink. Naruto's left arm swatted away the attack, before his feet landed him on the branch of a nearby tree, with Sakura and Sai to his side. The barbed wire had dug deeply into his right hand, but as he pulled it back he was met with a satisfying sound of skin being ripped. The fumes of the fire and the smoke delivered a hellish scene as the first genin from a Megakure had its throat ripped apart with blood gushing out like a fountain. The barbed wire quickly was recoiled, sweat trickling down Naruto's brow as the head began to make itself known. "Where's their third member?" Sakura asked, looking around. Sai grabbed his tanto with the blade downwards, holding it with both his hands. "Incoming shinobi from 5 o'clock. Scatter and counter ambush." Naruto barked as he jumped in the air. "The night is young. Let us feast with the blood of the wicked." The teen roared as he flung 3 kunao at an incoming figure. Blood rushed to his head as he felt the satisfying sensation of power coursing through his vein. The Kirigakure shinobi had probably been allied with the Omegakure ones. There were after all 2 figures, and not only the one that Naruto had seen. Cackling madly, he let the clawed gauntlet of the Kirigakure shinobi slash at his shoulder, as white mist rolled in to deaden his view, but his view was already blinded by bloodlust itself. Sakura watched from an upper branch as Naruto battled 2 shinobi by himself, taking wounds that healed within moments. It was his face, however, that made her heart stop for a beat. It was cackling with glee as if he enjoyed wounding and being wounded. The Yoroi Tanto pierced the metal gauntlet of the Kiri shinobi just as the surviving Omegakure one exhaled poison once more. She jumped back up the tree bark, avoiding the jumping attack of her own enemy, a Kiri kunoichi with flowing brown hair. Ice needles materialized from her very palms, as Sakura's eyes widened in fright. "Beta 2-5. She yelled out, 3 explosive tags flung forward with speed detonated then, giving her enough of a wide berth to make another jump and close in with Sai. The pale-skinned shinobi nodded from his spot. A bloodline user, one with chakra element 2 and 5 together to form ice. Probably a Yukigakure shinobi emigrated to Kiri, but wasn't Kiri under the bloodline purges? Sai's own opponent was the third Kiri shinobi, this one wielding not only a clawed hand like the one fighting Naruto, but also holding onto a blade chain with said gauntlet and whipping it against him as fast as he could. He ducked down, deftly avoiding the blade and watching it sink in the bark of the tree behind him. He charged ahead without even blinking, tanto ready to pierce. Sakura was behind him even as the opponent seemed to smirk and retract the chain with strength. His teammate spun around kunao in hand, parrying the chain's return momentum and swatting it away. The smirk of the Kiri shinobi was short-lived, as his tanto plunged in deeply into the enemy's chest straight between the ribs and to the heart. Sakura came next from his right side, puncturing the opponent's carotid artery before he could even react and damaging the spine as she brought her kunao to slice through the neck side all the way to his back. Fluidly, Sai removed the tanto from the enemy shinobi and began to run once more, this time slightly behind Sakura, who was making a turn on a few branches to catapult her body back in the fray. "Satrap!" Sai quipped as they flew back down to where Naruto was still fighting, bleeding heavily but not relenting as his glee-filled face was now carving deep bites on torn chest of the screaming Kirigakure shinobi remaining. The Omegakure one had lost its right leg, and the left arm sported broken splinters of bone that had apparently been chewed upon. "In control," Sakura replied calmly as she gracefully landed behind the last remaining enemy. The Kirigakure kunoichi was barraging with ice needles the back of Naruto, who seemed to not even be feeling them pierce his skin even though blood seemed to ooze out of his every wound. "Stop it! Stop it!" The kunoichi outright screamed as she collapsed on her knees in tears. "Please! We surrender! Stop it, please!" Sakura looked to Sai as she gestured with her head to the hyperventilating kunoichi. With a nod, Sai slowly walked forward, tanto in hand. "Naruto! Enough!" Sakura barked, taking a step forward as Sai kept his tanto trained on the kunoichi's neck. "Stop this instant!" There was a sickening crunch as Naruto's mouth snapped a rib of the now, hopefully dead Kirigakure shinobi. Sakura felt sick. Naruto had been literally feasting on the entrails of a living shinobi. What the hell was going on? She remembered him doing the very same thing once before, during their mission near the border of Kirigakure. "I remember," he growled threateningly. "I smelled their thoughts before," he hissed. His eyes narrowed on the kunoichi. Who are you? Sakura took a step back, her hand clenching tightly on the hilt of one of her kunai. She wasn't afraid of Naruto, for Kami's sake. Naruto? She snapped back at him. Snap out of it. His eyes narrowed on her for an instant, and in that moment she saw it, the red iris of the crimson beast, the malice pooled from thousands of years of humanity's existence. She saw the hatred, the anger, the rage, and she collapsed down on the ground just like the Kiri Kunoichi. That wasn't Naruto. Not Naruto took a step forward, and then another. He staggered for a moment as a small white fog slowly appeared from his wounds, vaporized healing chakra. His wounds closed as Naruto's accusing finger went to the kunoichi in question. You, tell me their names. Gozu and Miizu, she stammered out in fear. They're Chunin from Kiri. They forced me to participate with them. I didn't want to but... Your name, he snarled. What is your name? I'm Haku. I'm a genin. Really? I didn't want to but my sensei was forced, and Kiri's not. Silence. He growled. Did they ever go to the border on missions? What? Answer my question. I don't know. Please, I'll do anything as long as you let me leave. Haku pleaded, visibly frightened. You can have my body if you want to. I just want to live. Ugh, Naruto mumbled, wincing as his eyes slowly receded back to the bright cerulean blue that was his normal gaze. Fine, he whispered, his throat cracking. Leave and don't turn back. Sai raised an eyebrow, before slowly letting the tanto go from the girl's neck. The kunoichi smiled briefly, before jumping away and disappearing into the thick branches. I don't feel well, he muttered then, falling down on his knees. Suddenly, he began to puke out vivid crimson fluids, bits and pieces of flesh and white fragments of bone. Sakura just stared at the scene dumbly for a moment more, before slowly getting back on her feet and walking closer to him. She didn't say a word. She just held his shoulders as he retched and felt beneath her fingers Naruto's muscles trembling from fear. Fear not of what he had done, but of what he was. Sai looked around a moment more, before finally saying, we should move before the fire spreads to our location. Did they have scrolls? Sakura asked in a whisper. Supplies. I'll check, Sai murmured, before heading off. Sakura turned her gaze back to Naruto, and to his hands clenching on. Naruto! Let go! She exclaimed, shocked, grabbing hold of his right hand and slowly prying open his fingers. The barbed wire that should have been used as a defense system, he had unclasped a bundle to use as some sort of whip, but he had held onto it so tightly it had dug in on his palm. This is going to hurt, Sakura whispered, biting her lip, as she firmly held with a thick cloth onto the metallic wire. Naruto was already sweating, but nodded once. She pulled with strength. Naruto didn't scream, but simply blanched out before vapors of chakra slowly healed his palm once more. This time, Sakura watched with fascination as tiny sparks of red chakra touched the raw skin and the muscle itself, knitting everything back to how it was and closing it without the slightest moment of weight. The Kyuubi's and I. Naruto murmured, his throat coarse. We don't see eye to eye mostly, and I understand him. I think I'd be pissed off too at being imprisoned when innocent. He closed his eyes. But this, I hate this, but he's strong and I need him. A sob escaped Naruto's throat. I'm no better than a monster, feeding on human flesh like this, instinct he calls it, to feast on the wicked. I don't like it. I never wanted this. He never wanted this either. There are moments where I wish I simply had not to carry this burden. Sakura waited, still holding on to Naruto's shoulders as he watched the boy of 12 of her very same age, tremble and shudder because of what he held on his shoulders. She didn't know how she would fare against the Kyuubi within her. Would she too eat enemy shinobi? Would she too vomit their flesh? She didn't want to know. So she just hugged Naruto tighter, hoping Sai would be quick and everything would turn out well. They had survived, and 2 teams were down already. Sai came back a moment later, holding onto a purple scroll. There was the kanji for victory written on it, and it was closed with a thick stamp of wax, probably to prevent tampering with the contents. We have to move, This time, Sai's words carried urgency. We have a scroll. There is light and noise. Recons might arrive any moment. Naruto, can you run? Sakura asked to her teammate, who nodded numbly. Stumbling back on his feet, he took a few more steps away from the pool of his bloody vomit and the corpses he had half-eaten, before jumping for the nearest branch. Sai and Sakura followed him a moment later, and as they left for a safer area to sleep to, a thought crossed his mind. If Orochimaru had been there, near them, why hadn't he attacked? Wasn't he after the Kyuubi? In the depths of the root base, now temporary headquarter for a secret training between 3 Kusa Genin and 3 Konoha Genin, a medic Chiyunin hired to oversee the entire program knocked thrice on the door to one of the Genin's rooms. Uchiha-san. We need to talk. And Kabuto's smile, it was just perfect. Chapter 23, The Blood of Unwashed Sins. Sakura lowered herself in the small crevice of rocks, her hands grasping at the hem of a scroll. She was held by her thighs by Naruto, who remained in quiet concentration. With a final stretch of effort, while gritting her teeth, she managed to grasp at the third and final scroll they needed to pass. With a sigh of relief, she signaled the all-clear and was hastily pulled up by her teammate. Sai gave one last look around the area, before finally coming near his 2 teammates. No opposition, he remarked dryly. Hyuga must have found the other scrolls. He calmly dispelled the ink mice that were surrounding them, letting the ink repool into his ink pot. With a deft movement of his paintbrush, he began to paint once more on another map. We can safely assume, he displayed the map of the training ground, drawn as they went, that the scrolls were placed in a circular pattern around the tower. 5 making a pentagram of the outer rings and 5 closer. Sakura nodded, before her eyes began to quickly scan the painting. We should find a safe place to hide. What's the range of the Hyuga eyes anyway? Konoha secret, Sai quipped back. We might be in their range for all that we know. Having 3 scrolls means that the possible 8 team of Shika is going to come for us. Sakura bit her lower lip as she spoke. That is, if they have a Hyuga. Unless he cuts off Chuji, Naruto whispered, or himself. In that case, he can aim for a 10-scroll party. Yeah, disqualification will probably sound good to him now, Sakura muttered. After Ami's death, she didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that, the exam is so fucked up it isn't even sane anymore. Still. Naruto tensed. Sigma 3. As one man, Naruto dashed forward soon followed by both Sakura and Sai. The spot they had been before erupted in spikes of earth and thick rock lances that formed a deadly skewering trap. 3 kunai flew in the air, explosive tags attached to them and detonating in the front of Naruto's team direction. Dodging to the side, Team 13 found his road blocked by a buzzing alcove of bees and bugs. The monstrous swarms fell upon them in an instant. Sakura whipped out 2 explosive tags of her dwindling stockpile and threw them on the ground, letting them detonating and disorienting the vermin long enough for Sai to paint a wave of ink on his parchment. The ink wave erupted from the paper, drowning the incoming insects. Naruto's right arm came up, deflecting 5 poison-coated needles that struck deeply into his flesh. He didn't as much as scream as he clenched his hand and soared forward with a volley of kunai of his own. They made contact with the opponents, and just as the sparks of the kunai hitting one another appeared, Naruto's own chakra blade slammed against the tanto of the enemy from Iwagakure. The kunoichi in question had short bowel-cut black hair, and deep pupil-less pink eyes. In such close contact, Naruto could see her eyelashes went up at the corner of her eyes, and she seemed to be holding an arrogant smirk on her face that he had all the intention of wiping out. "You're no match for us, Konoha-nin," she coyly whispered as she pushed with her sword through in a display of strength. How could a girl have such a monstrous force to begin with? Surrender your scrolls and we won't have to kill you. You and what army? Sakura bantered back as her kunai struck against a nearby tree, the tip hitting the bark and forcing the hidden shinobi out of there. Can hide in a forest, Iwa-nin. Can I fight them, Kuratsuki? Can I? A jovial voice rung in the clearing, as a tall and fat-looking shinobi of Iwa literally skittered along with tiny jumps. He looked like an overexcited puppy. "This brat is mine," she said haughtily. "Take care of the other 2, Akatsuki." "We should retreat, Kuratsuki-sama," the shinobi that Sakura had flushed out remarked. It isn't wise, he added. He's like Han, the blonde and glass-wearing Uegakuer shinobi narrowed his gaze on Naruto as he spoke. My bees feel it. That's creepy, the girl bantered back, but her smile just grew. I want to fight him, Hibachi. I know I can take Han most days. He lets you win, Kuratsuka-sama, Hibachi remarked. Naruto jumped back using the distraction of the small talk between the two enemy shinobi, his back landing squarely against the shoulder of both of his teammates. Kunao in hand, all three of them looked for the closest escape point as the fat genin seemed to be hopping on his spot uncomfortably while looking torn between them and the kunoichi of his team. Can I fight them? Please. He pleaded once more. We already killed 2 teams, Sakura spoke crisply. Don't force our hands to add you to our tally count. Oh, the Konoha girl likes to pillow talk, Kuratsuka grinned. You think you can take us on? She spat on the ground near her. I'd like to see you try. I'm the granddaughter of the Tsuchikage. You know what that means? I have all the techniques of IWA I can wish for. I have all the knowledge, the secrets, I'm in line to become the next one after my father, and you? You're just a no-name. Maybe you're even a civilian kunoichi. One of those who ends up whoring themselves out in second-rate missions in enemy shinobi beds. You. Sakura hissed, clenching her fist. Say that to my fist, IWA scum. I can attack and kill you 3 with ease, Kuratsuka smiled. And you know why? Because there are Konoha Jounin or Umbu around us. They will stop you from killing me. It would be a diplomatic blunder if the granddaughter of the Tsuchikage were to die in a Konoha-hosted exam, one so big it could jumpstart a war. There was silence as the declaration sunk in. There are Jounin shadowing us. Sakura whispered in disbelief. Of course, Kuratsuka rolled her eyes. You're clearly a civilian if you don't know this, so let me explain. She raised her right hand, pointing at a patch of trees a bit far away from them. Chunin exams are publicly hosted. Promising genin are shown entering the arena at the end and are broadcasted fighting all across Fire Country. How difficult do you think it would be for an enemy village to obtain said broadcasting? How difficult to analyze fighting styles, learn weaknesses, and exploit them? And really, promoting a mere 1 to 10 genin to Chunin from the starting pool of 150 or more. Tisk. 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 The kunoichi shook her head. You see, the exams are public display of bloodline strength or shinobi strength. Practically any shinobi worth his salt knows what the Byakugan can do see through solid matter, see Tenketsu points. So watching Hyuga genin fight with a toned-down style. Nice and flashy, and completely safe from exploitation, the kunoichi shrugged. But there could still be some idiots who die after all, she shook her head. A lot of inbred clan children are too stupid, like Hibachi here, to go anywhere without a babysitter. The glass-wearing genin ground his teeth, but remained nonetheless quiet. So the hosting village makes deals with the other villages. Things like, hand us over a few missions and your teams will survive mostly intact, or, we will safeguard specific shinobi in exchange for research information on something else, and things like that. Sometimes they just exchange ryos under the table too. A bloodline-wielding shinobi that dies in another village will have his corpse prodded to the very last cell after all. It's how things are done. Do you know that if it's still fresh, they can even get the baby matter from the body? And fertilize kunoichi to get new bloodline wielders. Kuratsuka was smiling widely. Sometimes, they do this for a few generations too, to get the very best they can. Of course sometimes it requires a bit of inbreeding to get it right, but my big brother Deidara is a dashing example of it. She chuckled with glee. So, you see, you are worthless pawns. You, the civilian girl. You'll probably end up as an administration Chunin or somewhere forgotten where you'll have to open your legs to survive. You, pale-skinned boy. You'll be sent off to some faraway outpost to spend the rest of your life watching clouds roll by, and you, her eyes gleamed as she looked at the Jin hierarchy of the Kyuubi. You'll be dehumanized. They'll break you to the point where you'll be no better than a dog on a leash. They'll tie you down with chains, flog you until you can no longer recall your name, and finally they'll give you a new one. They'll publicly call you hero of Konoha, maybe, but in private, behind the golden locked doors of your gilded cage, you'll be their weapon. Sweetly, she clapped her hands together. Just like the Yondaime Hokage. That murderous slaughterer that your country so exalts to the point of bordering insanity. Really? She shook her head. Isn't he nothing more than an overglorified bringer of carnage? Konoha isn't like Iwagakure, Naruto spoke first, after a few moments of silence. His cerulean eyes locked with those of the Tsuchikage's granddaughter, before quietly turning to leave. We're leaving. Kurotsuka snarled. Giving me your back? Overconfident much? No, he shook his head. You said it yourself, the exam is a scam. I am the Kyuubi hierarchy. He turned his gaze slightly back to where the kunoichi had taken a step backwards in surprise. I'm sure nobody would want me to die, so Konoha needs me more than it needs you alive. If we were to fight to the death, you know who they would let survive out of us too, don't you? Tisk, Kurotsuka spat on the ground once more. You coward. Touch my team, he hissed back, and I'll come for your entire village. And Nine Tails beat everything else, don't they? Go find yourself some scrolls elsewhere. Kurotsuka-sama, Hibachi said crisply. We should leave. The kunoichi from Iwa clenched her fists, gritting her teeth and snapping her eyes shut as her shoulders began to tremble from her simmering rage. Then, suddenly, she simply stilled and grinned. Yatun, Sekijyo no Jutsu. From beneath Team 13's feet quicklime erupted, the thick and congealing lime covering Naruto's team to their necks before any of them could act. The Kurotsuka they had been talking to till that moment crumbled to stone, as another emerged with a sarcastic smile from the ground itself. She thrust her hand into the lime, eliciting gasps and wide eyes from Sakura as her hands prodded around the sticky substance that impeded any movement from them. Swiftly, the 3 scrolls they had painstakingly acquired emerged from the lime, while the granddaughter of the Tsuchikage began to whistle happily as she threw 2 of them to her teammates. You know, Kurotsuka smirked. You should never let an enemy talk and buy time. She winked as she slowly walked around Naruto himself. Well, as you can see we're not going to kill your teammates or you, she brought her mouth extremely close to Naruto's right ear, softly whispering then. You were kind of cute trying to act all tough just a moment ago, I like strong men, with a teasing smirk, she then gently kissed him on the lips. See you soon. She winked one last time coyly, before disappearing with the rest of her team in a flicker. Naruto stood there, numbly trying to recall just how soft those lips seemed to, no, wait, he was trying to find a way out of there, but the lips were strangely soft for a kunoichi, not that he had any experience with another kunoichi lips but he was stammering and stuttering in his very own mind. Bitch. 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 The repeated words of anger that came from behind Naruto forced the teen to slowly try and turn his head. He could actually see Sakura's hair rise and be covered in chakra-induced illusions of flames. Bitch. 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 Her emerald eyes were positively murderous. Who the hell does she think she is, that bitch? That good-for-nothing harlot. That deviant daughter of a WH. Cherry, Sai said calmly. Seduction is a part of the kunoichi arsenal should they wish for it. That had to be experience, Sakura said then with a strangely calm tone. She clearly had to have experience fucking other shinobi, there's really no other explanation, she said that sweetly, as cracks began to appear around the lime holding her still. The moment the lime dried, it lost much of its strength and consistency and Sakura's rage was enough to actually emerge from the lime with a strong pushing of muscles. I'm going to kill her, plain and simple. Naruto was the second to break free, soon followed by Sai. They got our scrolls, the Jinhiriki whispered. If we consider the Hyuga as having the rest of them. That means there might be one free scroll around yet, Sai remarked, Dickless, don't despair. We can always find the H. Sai tensed, before Naruto's right hand threw a volley of shurikens at a rustling bush. Hey! The female voice that exclaimed that was soon met with a light of recognition from Naruto's eyes. Karin. As soon as Naruto said that, the red-haired Uzumaki girl emerged from the bushes, holding her right arm out where 2 shurikens had struck and were making her bleed light dribbles. Is that how you greet family in Konoha? She said then hesitantly. She looked ragged, her hair filled with branches and leaves and her legs sported scrapes similar to those who repeatedly fell with their knees on the ground. Her jacket was singed and half torn, and the fact that she was alone. Sorry, Naruto said moving closer. Stop. Sakura barked at the boy, who stilled. It could be a trap. I. Karen muttered, her eyes wide, I'm no longer inclined to participate. My team was attacked last night, one of the Uegakuer teams. We had no chance, she blinked away the tears. They let me go, she sobbed. The implied meaning was there. It was all that it took for Sakura to feel sick. Surely, they wouldn't. It's all right, she moved closer, slowly but firmly hugging the other girl. Her gaze went to Naruto, who seemed perplexed, but with a simple glance he nodded too, before giving a curt nod to Sai who relaxed. They can't hurt you anymore now, Sakura whispered clutching the other kunoichi tightly. We should try and survive through this, Naruto commented then. If we can link up with another team from Konoha. They're circling each other, Karen murmured. I'm a chakra sensor. The enemy attacked while I was sleeping but... She bit her lips, they're close to the tower, one team is made of 11 shinobi. The other is made of 9. If we remove the IWA team we met, the Kiri and AIM team we killed and your team too. Naruto frowned. There are 3 teams on one side and 4 on the other. That makes, wait, the boy whispered, Sakura. Was there a Kiri team in the first exam that passed? Huh? Of course there W. Sakura's eyes widened in disbelief. There wasn't. Team 5, 8, 9, and 10 from Konoha passed, one team was from Tsunagakuer. There was one team from Omegakuer, one from Takigakuer, one team from Kusagakuer and Otagakuer and finally 2 from Uegakuer. No Kiri shinobi passed the first test. So who did we kill last night? Naruto queried with his eyes wide. And how did they get in? Orochimaru breached them inside, Sai said calmly. His gaze hardening to steel. Everyone was distracted on them. Nobody bothered to check the number of participants once inside, and with the death toll already coming down. We are no longer 12 teams in the forest, Naruto muttered. Shit. Why aren't they stopping the exam then? Probably Hokage's orders, Sai quipped back, before turning to Karen. If you're a censor, then where are the closest Jounin signatures? There aren't, she replied perplexed. I mean, I can sense something that seems like one from the 11 shinobi team, but there are none in the rest of the forest. The tower is crammed with Jounin though. Shit, Naruto closed his eyes shut. Orochimaru played them. He sent Genin level assassin or maybe Chiryunin rank. We have to be careful. We need to link up with Shikamaru and the rest of them, they need to be warned of the danger. If Shika's smart, he has Hinata's team and both Team 5 and Taki's team, Sakura began, which means the other 9 are made of Team 10, Otagakuer and IWA shinobi attacked you? Then it can only be Tsunagakuer. How are they faring? Naruto asked immediately to Karen, who seemed quite jumpy. Is Shikamaru holding on? I don't know. It's really chakra intensive and, I can only do small pulses with it most of the time, she said with a grieving voice. We're going there. Sakura looked at Naruto, who in turn looked at Sai. Sai looked at Sakura before looking at Naruto. As one, all 3 of them nodded. We have to. Karen bit her lip, before slowly nodding her head. Fine, please don't leave me behind. The last part, she pleaded it directly to Naruto who seemed surprised and shocked. Those crimson eyes were looking at him through tears, as if expecting him to be some sort of savior and protector. He nodded once, schooling his features as he turned to Sakura and Sai. We proceed in formation. Eat a ration and move out, we'll need the energy. To those orders, the rest of his team nodded. Shikamaru was having a bad day. It had started well enough with Ami's death, a freezing night spent beneath a tree huddled close to Chuji who snored like a bear and then a morning wake-up call in the form of Team 8 wanting his brain smarts to win the competition. The fact the idea had come from Kiba had perplexed him, since when did the Inyazuka have a brain? In any event, they had soon joined forces with Team 5, a group of no-named 20-something years old genin who had passed by sheer luck. Gene was 22 years old, and had failed far more genin exams than they could count. Komuji was 23, and Ineo was apparently his cousin of 22. The three of them had some sort of permanent depressed mood always attached to them, as if they didn't believe they'd survive through the night. The Dakigakuer team had joined them midway. Konoha's teams had a Hyaga, they wanted to cooperate, and Shikamaru didn't want to proceed with the exam at all. So they were 11, the maximum applicable no matter what. The two genin from Taki were called Shivuki and Hoki, while the Kunoichi was called Ryazetsu. He knew there was something amiss with the way the girl walked, but he couldn't find it out, and the other two seemed genuinely genin and eager to help out. As they were now, they were in a deadlock with Team 10 and their allies. There was a wide brush of plain covered in dirt mounds, which in truth hid both ordnance-like explosive tags and rigged-up mines and deadly snakes that their nests in that specific pasture. They were hiding in caves once used by the tigers of the area, which were now hopefully abandoned. Niji's team was instead using the trees as cover, and was holding them there into a siege battle since the moment they had found each other. He didn't know what the reason for such hostility was, but he knew there simply was no way he was going to capitulate and let the rest of the shinobi under his command be slaughtered. From what he had gathered, Niji's team was allied both with a Tsunagakuer shinobi team and an Otagakuer one. This was where the luck ended. Iwagakuer shinobi would have without a doubt managed to cave them in or turn the terrain to their advantage. As it was, they were evenly matched and playing a game of attrition. His side possessed 3 scrolls, and it was probably clear that Niji didn't hold all of the others. He probably had either 2 or 3, maybe 4. They were holding them off to prevent them from reaching the tower and have less competition afterwards. And he had to admire the shrewdness of the action. If they managed to get their scrolls, they would probably reach 7 and ship off towards the tower. Niji had to know they didn't possess all the scrolls. Hinata had told him that her cousin's range was far wider than hers, and she furthermore had said they weren't carrying their scrolls on their person, which made even more sense, since by hiding the scrolls in a location only a Hyaga could see guaranteed the cooperation of the others. He didn't know the whereabouts of Team 13 or of the 2 teams from Iwagakuer, or the one from AIM, but that didn't bode well at all. He watched as Hinata Hyaga was doing her best to smile as she applied a healing salve to one of Shino's shoulders. The Abarame had been sent out with his bugs for recon, he had barely come back alive by shielding himself with his insects. Team 10's long-range specialist had a devastating accurate precision. It was like being beneath archery fire the moment you stepped outside, only the arrows hit and detonated at the same time. "They're trying to push through again," Gene exclaimed, grabbing hold of his kunao as he, Ineo and Komuji headed off for the contingency they had planned beforehand. Shikamaru carefully watched from his position as the trio of genin faced off against a single red-haired shinobi. It was the genin with the gourd. Sand seemed to be coming out from it, and he appeared to be manipulating the fine grains with practiced ease. He frowned. The sand appeared sluggish, but when his eyes settled on the Tsunagakuer's shinobi feet he understood. He was levitating on a sand platform, avoiding the mines and the traps placed as walls of sand rose forward to swat away the incoming projectiles from Team 5. Shikamaru had a bad feeling. The bad day suddenly became worse when an arrow firmly struck Gene in the neck, blood gushing out like a fountain as the 20-something-year-old genin began to choke on his own blood. What the hell was Team 10 thinking? They were Konoha genin. They weren't supposed to kill one another. A shadow passed over the clearing then. Shikamaru's eyes went wide as he watched the Tsunagakuer Kunoichi fly over a giant fan, before jumping in midair to grasp at it and send devastating wind scythes at the entire clearing. The ordnance and the traps detonated all at once. Was she planning on killing her teammate? Team 5 felt the brunt of the explosions. Being torn apart by the traps they themselves had placed wasn't pleasant, but their screams made Shikamaru feel overrun. He had lost 3 genin. 3 persons who trusted him to do the right thing. They were just supposed to pelt the enemy from the distance, behind a line of traps. They weren't supposed to die. 5 heartbeats later, and Shikamaru exhaled slowly as he stood up, both hands rising in the general surrender way. "We surrender, Niji. State your terms before more are killed." What? Ryazetsu barked back. You can't be serious. We've gone from 11 to 8 in an instant, Shikamaru deadpanned, and that boy isn't normal. You want to make a run with the scrolls by yourself? Feel free. This isn't worth it. We'll do just that, the kunoichi snapped. Hand over the scrolls. They're hidden in the back of this cave, beneath the fourth rock pillar from your right, the Nara drawled before turning to the entrance of the cave. Leave if you can, I'm going outside. Nara-san, going outside without protection is ill-advised. Why? Because no one knows if they will stop attacking or finish you off. Shino brought his glass back at the top of his nose as he spoke. We should try and terminate the Suna composition of the enemy. How? I do not know. Shikamaru sighed, before exhaling one more time. They aren't going to stop until they get what they want, the Nara shook his head. It's the only way. He walked out with his hands above his head. We would like to speak terms. He quickly exclaimed. Smart boy, the Tsunagaku kunoichi landed next to him in a moment, folding her giant fan but taking out a smaller one. Now where are the scrolls? Twin volleys of smoke erupted from within the cave, soon followed by 3 figures dashing away. The moment the Suna kunoichi took to stammer out and cough, Shikamaru's sign of the rat was completed. Cage main, he said dryly, completed. The blonde pig-tailed girl found herself turning around with a hand clasping her giant fan. Not controlling her body, she found herself opening it completely before bringing her left hand towards the cloth center of it. No, she whispered. You can't do. And then there was the noise of fabric being ripped, as her very own hands tore apart her most prized possession. It was a gift from my mother, she whispered, then frothing in rage. I will have my revenge for this. Nobody moves. Shikamaru barked, even as the red-haired genin from Suna didn't seem inclined to stop. It won't work, Tamari chuckled dryly. Gaara's not going to listen to why. And then he stopped. Straight in the middle of the clearing, Gaara stopped. The reason became apparent when another team appeared on one side of the forest, one composed of 4 shinobi. Shikamaru exhaled in relief as he saw the familiar figure of Naruto, Sakura, and Sai accompanied by a 4th member that was from Kyuzagaku. Team 13 was probably going to try and be diplomatic about Orochimaru of the Sun has invaded the exam test area. Naruto Uzumaki barked out quickly. He is an S-rank shinobi threat. A Kiragaku team had already infiltrated the area. There might be more. We must stop fighting and head towards the tower as quickly as possible. Yeah, like hell, Tamari snorted from her position, even with Shikamaru's cage mane was firmly holding on to her. The Nara began to sweat. Naruto wasn't known to be a liar. A loner maybe, a prankster in youth too, but he did appear serious. Those are lies. Niji Hyuga took the decision away. If you met with him, why are you still alive? You're lying, trying to get to the scrolls. Oh, for the love of... Fight me, Gaara's voice resounded crisply into the clearing, his eyes icy as they stared at Naruto's form. If you win, you will have my scroll and prove your words. If I win, you and your teammates will die. Sands whipped around the Tsunagaku shinobi like waves, forming hands as the platform upon which he rested his feet began to levitate. Fight me, prove my existence with your blood. He snarled, angrily screaming. Prove to me your strength, Kyuubi no Kitsune. Shikamaru's eyes narrowed as he watched Naruto give a quick glance over to both Sakura and Sai, his 2 teammates looking at Gaara and shaking their heads firmly. Naruto just gave them an wry smile, before carefully nodding once. Sakura seemed defeated, the girl biting her lip in an effort to say something. The red-haired girl that had been there since the beginning purposefully marched forward and gave a kiss to Naruto's cheek, making the dark-haired boy stutter. Shikamaru's sweat dropped. The Tsunagaku shinobi looked positively murderous at being ignored. He watched with the corner of his eyes as Sakura seemed to steel her resolve, before clasping onto Naruto's clothes and full-out kissing him on the lips. The best reaction to define that, would be that Rock Lee guffawed. The sickening feeling of bloodlust simply increased after that in the air, as Naruto found himself taking a few more steps forward towards the clearing, while the rest of his teammates dropped back in the surrounding forest. A real shinobi doesn't fight head-on, Naruto muttered, looking at the mass of sand and hatred that seemed to be Gaara. Danzo-sensei would kill me if he were to watch this. In the bowels of Root, Danzo Shimura watched through the water sphere with anger simmering to explode. He eyed the slightly worried Hokage, who seemed to be trying to get into contact with the teams stationed to guard over the Jinhiriki of the sand. Let me guess, Danzo smoothly muttered. No Jounin or Umbu is answering the call from their surrounding, and Tenzo is not reachable. They are sighting Orochimaru in the other areas. He's trying to reach the Iwagakure teams. So either we let him kill Unaki's granddaughter and start a war. Danzo smoothly interjected, or we let the battle between the two Jinhiriki play out. In the training ground 44, it's too close to Konoha, he exhaled once. Sound the alert. Have the civilians head for the bunkers. I trust Naruto implicitly to hold the Kyuubi in check. His only eye narrowed, but I don't trust Tsunagakure's Jinhiriki at all. Try and get Tenzo to answer for Kami's sake. We're going to have a battle between Jinhiriki at the doors of our village. Gaara didn't know why. He had always been alone. People hated him, tried to kill him and threw things at him. He could never sleep. He could never close his eyes because a voice soon began to whisper bad things in his ears. Then his uncle had died, and the voice had told him she was his mother. He had believed the voice, and he no longer had been alone. Now, in the clearing, he watched as another walked forward purposefully. This one had cerulean eyes, a darker shade than his, and dark hair. He had teammates who talked to him, and one even kissed him. He had never been kissed, not even on the cheek. He had never been hit, but not for lack of trying. He was furious. How dare he? How dare he have what he had not? He would show him. He would. Shukaku, Naruto spoke firmly. Are you in there? He added then. He was relaying the Kyuubi's words, better that than to become some sort of chakra beacon. Mother doesn't want to talk to you. She wants to fight you. Shukaku, the Kyuubi snarled. Answer me. It was annoying before, but now, where are the others? That's not my name. Gaara screamed back as the sand around him began to pulse with blue lights. I am the Ichibai. The ruler of the desert. Shukaku, Kurama whispered quietly. What have they done to you? It was so small, the Ichibai whimpered like a child. So small and cold. It was a vase. Can you think a vase is enough for me? I had to become small. Smaller and smaller or the vase would crack, and the next would be tighter and more hurtful. It was maddening. Tell me, Unii-san, why did it have to be me? The voice wasn't that of a bloodthirsty monster. It looked, it felt, it seemed, like that of a child, a scared one. Why did I have to be brought to this maddening world? Why did I have to be the misery? All can react, but I suffer alone. All can do, but I cry alone. I was left alone. You never came to save me, big brother. Nobody came to me. I was left alone. In the vase. Crying. Why weren't you there for me, brother? Did you not love me? Shukaku, Kurama spoke firmly. Why have you not freed yourself? The seal of the boy is weak. I have lived in a cage for centuries, brother. Shukaku spoke through Gaara's mouth. I am afraid of leaving the prison. What if the next hurts more? Naruto clenched his right fist. His blood felt as if it was boiling. I understand, he finally whispered. So you want to fight, brother? I want to be free from my duties. Then as your older brother, Naruto unsheathed his Yoroi Tanto, red and crimson chakra lapping out and surrounding his frame, I will free you from your burden. A shroud of crimson chakra burned through the grass of the clearing, as fire itself naturally lit the area, generating a firestorm that crackled madly throughout the area. A pool of flames surrounded the two fighters, as Naruto's mind watched from within the sewer-like room the Kyuubi's chakra flowing through the water, the pipes, and the surroundings. The water was slowly boiling away, and as Naruto hissed in pain, the Kyuubi's crimson eyes narrowed on him. You are not fighting me. Have you gone mad, finally? I understand, Naruto whispered back, closing his eyes firmly. His pain, I understand it. The Kyuubi grinned slightly, showing his giant teeth. Then open your eyes, Naruto Uzumaki, the Kyuubi remarked. Watch as the malice of men works. My brother ruled over the sands, he was maybe a sight of misery while free, but as long as he was, misery could be kept controlled. He was the leash of the desert itself. The solitude, the despair, and he was the kindness in the midst of the nothingness. He was the oasis you can find in the middle of nowhere. Kurama's eyes glazed over as he remembered. He was the weakest, and yet, he always harbored the belief that even in despair, even in the deepest pits of misery, there was a chance to rise back up. The Kyuubi took a deep breath. And look at him now. The Kyuubi's roar came just as Naruto's body in the world slammed his left hand covered in red chakra against the ground, splintering it as the dangerous chakra arm emerged further down, piercing through the sand platform of Gaara and grabbing the boy's feet. Gaara screamed as he threw a barrage of sand projectiles at Naruto, who deftly dodged them while being forced to let go of the limb. The sand shield is new, Kurama hissed through Naruto's teeth. But not enough, Shukaku. Stop saying that name. Gaara screamed with a voice a mixture of the Ichibai and his. I am mother. I am Ichibai. I am not worthy of a name that means nothing to me anymore. And then Gaara's body cracked as the sand seemed to fall apart, before converging and tightening around the red-haired boy to form strange disproportionate limbs. Mother will feast on your blood, Gaara smiled. Shikamaru watched with fascination the battle, even after the cage main had failed. It took him just a glance to understand that Temari wouldn't be going anywhere anyway. The girl was trembling in fear. It's free, she muttered shaking. It's free. Naruto-kun, Hinata whispered with her Byakugan active. She clasped her hands together, her Byakugan active as she watched the chakra of a brilliant red and soothing gold mix and bat away at each other, as if a battle for dominance was just not only happening between shinobi, but also between their very chakra. It was because of that neither she, nor her teammates, saw the dark ink snake that slithered slowly towards her ankle, with its teeth glinting dangerously as poison gleamed from the fangs. Niji, Tenten murmured as she watched while shaking the fight between monsters, rather than shinobi. What does fate says about this? We are going to die, Niji remarked calmly. It is fate's will that demons will fight in front of us. Niji. Yosh. We must provide help to our Konoha teammates. I wouldn't do that, the Oto archer of the Otagakuer team remarked dryly. Look at them, you'd be torn to shreds. Best let them kill each other. Demons like those trash monsters, they don't deserve to be helped. Shut the fucking mouth you have up. The female kunoichi of the Oto team snapped while cussing at her teammate. I'm trying to listen to what they're saying for fuck's sakes. Shouldn't we prepare a barrier? The hulking brute that was the third shinobi of the Otagakuer team asked then, his arms crossed over his chest. Unfortunately the other shitheads didn't pass, the girl replied. We'll have to wait and see. Damn, the Tsunagakuer puppet user muttered. If Gaara frees the Ichibai in here, now, damn. Sakura's hands clenched together as she watched Naruto fight Gaara, her eyes locking down on the possible enemy help. If anyone dared to even try as much as attack Naruto, she'd have their hides. And if someone even thought about kissing him again, she'd have their hides. She was planning on adding the Kyuzagakuer kunoichi to the list of people to get the hides from, just after Kuratsuki. But at the moment, all that she could do was to wait and see how the battle would fare on. Chapter 24, The Bloody Tears of Misery. A shadow streaked through a small room, a kunao glinting in the darkness. Who was the figure that wanted to kill him? Why? Had he done something wrong? Snap out of it, the Kyuubi's growl was threatening, as Naruto's eyes narrowed and concentrated once more on the battle. I can feel his chakra, it's unbalanced. His yin and his yang are completely wrong in proportion. When they sealed him, they made a mistake and left behind a few important parts, but all that is incomplete always tries to fix itself. Your misery will add to his, and his will add to yours. Do not be distracted lest you wish to lose yourself in the misery of all of mankind. A sand hand crashed down on the spot he had been a moment before, his muscles flexed with ease as he rolled and threw a volley of kunao that were quickly blocked by Gaara's sand shield. His sand defense seemed impenetrable, as the weapons were flung back and lost themselves behind the treetops. That thing isn't supposed to be there, Kurama muttered. Isabu is the one who uses techniques to shield, Shikaka was always about widespread destruction. So what? Naruto muttered, as hardened sand spears were swatted away by two red chakra tails that were surrounding his body. We find an opening. We don't need an opening, Kurama remarked calmly. My strength can shatter mountains. The question is how much your body can last before my chakra worms its way into your deepest coils, breaking them apart with its acidity? We are cooperating at present only out of a whim, but don't expect me to help you for anything else. We just share the same goal, understood? Yeah, Naruto swallowed hardly. So I can have more power. I can give you all that you desire, Naruto, Kurama smiled. You need but to ask, and be prepared for the consequences. As a wave of sand crashed in his direction, Naruto jumped above it instinctively, before columns of the golden gravel erupted from the very ground and grew spikes and arms. The multiple hands of sand clasped at Naruto's ankles and wrists, and then they began to pull. The red cloak of chakra didn't seem to bother with physical attacks, even though the sand hands were outright burning from the intensity of the heat, and turning into glass fragments that dug deeper into Naruto's flesh as more sand took their place. The pain was excruciating. Naruto's screams were soon died out as a cocoon of sand covered him completely from the outside, as Gaara's half-demented and half-deformed smile grew wider and wider. Yes, mother, his blood will be ours, he snarled with glee. We will prove our existence with his death. His misery and inescapable fate will be our continued life's confirmation. Sakura slowly clenched the hilt of her kunai. Quietly her other hand had been working on tying knot after knot of explosive tags to the very same weapon she intended to throw. She would exhaust her entire reserve, but Naruto wasn't going to die there if she could stop this. The rest of the genin watching were distracted by the scene to bother about her. The moment the last knot was done, she carefully hefted a needle with her free hand. Her gaze went to Sai, who was supposed to have venom last time she had checked. It would take only a drop to down the red-haired Tsunagaku or shinobi. It was then that she realized Sai had already disappeared, leaving behind nothing more than an aptly placed disguised ink clone. She frowned. Where had the pale boy gone? Maybe he had decided to take care of the distraction offered by the fight between Naruto and Gaara to get to the scrolls. She flicked her gaze to the sides. Everyone else seemed actually intent on watching the fight or avoiding the debris or projectiles that bounced off. More than once a rebounding kunai had nearly wounded her since the battle between Jinhuriki had started after all. But she didn't have the time. She needed poison. Karen, Sakura hissed in a low whisper. Her emerald eyes fixing on the crimson ones of the other kunoichi. Do you have poison? It was sexism, she knew, but it did have a source of truth. The fact that all female kunoichi carried some poison on them was outright sexist. But male were naturally stronger in muscles than females, and poison evened the odds by a long run. The kunoichi bit her lower lip, before nodding. Quietly, she passed a pinkish vial of something to her. Sakura didn't bother with asking the dosage. She wanted the boy killed, not knocked out. She jumped back behind a tree, leaving a bunch of herself in place. She had to be fast, Naruto's life depended on her. Hinata was watching with fright and awe the battle. Chakra lashed out and was met with more chakra. As sand clasped and surrounded Naruto, she widened her mouth in shock with a hand covering it. She couldn't scream. Naruto never lost. He was always happy and smiling. He was always grinning. Even in face of peril and whatnot, he never lost the will to succeed. Until something had happened, and his smile had been stolen. She had hated whoever had stolen his smile. She had hated watching him close off in himself, becoming another, her. She had been disgusted with herself too. Naruto's light, his shine, it had disappeared, and she had felt nice about it. She had hoped she could move closer to him, convince him to open up to her, and then become once more a ray of hope in the bleak world she lived in. She had been selfish, and someone else had taken her idea and made it her own. How dared Sakura Haruno take Naruto's first kiss? How dared she make him smile when it was her duty, her job, her most prized dream to be the one to do so? Why hadn't she kept being the ignorant and vapid girl that daydreamed of making Uchiha babies? Why did she have to wise up, realize Naruto's potential and fall in? No. She wouldn't have that. There was no way someone like Sakura could love Naruto. She was just using him for her own selfish needs. But she didn't have proof, and Naruto was smiling finally. He was blushing and stammering after years. How could she try and take that away from him? She couldn't. Hinata knew she had lost. Even as her heart broke from the pain, she knew there simply was nothing else to do. She wasn't going to do anything anymore to try and catch Naruto's attention, even when she had done nothing to begin with. Maybe if she hadn't simply fidgeted, maybe if she had talked to him before, acted less shyly. But no, she hadn't. And now, she would pay the price. Tenzo hated the job. The fact he had to cramp himself into one of his very own Mokuton bunshins wasn't the reason he truly hated it, but the no-slip rule of the Umbuteika was literally extreme. Never mind the reduction of Umbu deaths since the rule had been applied, never mind the harrowing training of death should one slip even once, never mind the fact he was at his second day with his bladder filled. Never mind that, the true problem was moving within the bunshin itself. He was tightly packed in a crouched form, and if he wanted to move he had to send pulses of chakra along the legs, the arms, the head to see through the eye sockets, and it didn't help that he had to make Akamaru bark every now and then. Thankfully the dog was known for never leaving the boy's head unless in battle, otherwise animating that bunshin on top of the one of Kiba? Maddening. Still, with chakra laying over the bunshin he was safe from the Byakugan itself, as long as he didn't slip. He was watching the battle unfold, but he still didn't know if he could slip out and placate the Jinhiriki or not. His orders had been clear-cut: avoid detection unless it becomes needed. Naruto didn't seem to have lost himself, and no Kyuubi was out and about. The Suna Jinhiriki was an unknown, but he had received his orders concerning that. If the Ichibai rampaged, Konoha could put him down and claim the One-Tails. So he was forced to watch. He sensed the arrival of one of the Konoha genin, the pale-skinned Sai. He eyed him carefully through the Mokuton bunshin's eyes the way he crept silently from behind their backs. He seemed to be looking for scrolls, considering everything. He heard the slithering of a snake's movement at his feet. In a moment, he squashed the snake ink that had been aiming to bite Hinata's ankle, spinning around ready to stop the other genin. When a blow dart tried to hit squarely on the neck Hinata, his Mokuton bunshin's right hand shot forth and stopped it. He was just about to say something to alert the others, when an arrow struck true through the thick canopy of trees, piercing straight through Hinata's side as she had spun around to watch Kiba move closer to her. There were only 3 words that now filled Tenzo's mind, as he watched the Hyagaeris slowly start to fall sideways with her eyes widened in fear, blood escaping from the wound copiously as her body hit the ground with a dull thud. He had slipped. But his and Shino's screams of Hinata were drowned as the Ichibai's murderous laughter filled the air. And now die. Die alone, swallowed in misery. Gaara's deformed right hand slowly lifted itself above the ground, the gleaming claws shining against the light of the sun as the boy's eyes widened, before he screamed out in a mixture of hatred and joy. Sabaku Soso. Naruto was lost in the darkness. There were strangled sobs and tears, a stale scent of blood filling the air. He looked around, before making a quick jump backwards as the Kyuubi seemed to tower right next to him, rather than elsewhere. I told you not to be caught, Kurama remarked calmly. His crimson gaze narrowed to something further down the way. Not that it bothers me, but dying is never something I found pleasant in all the times it happened. Did I die? Naruto whispered, a sick feeling settling at the base of his throat. No, Kurama snorted. You asked for more power, did you not? The Kyuubi smiled sweetly. Let it never be said that I am not cooperative. 4 tails of black darkness emerged from the sand coffin of Gaara, as it detonated outwards, tearing apart the very clearing the 2 Jinhiriki had been fighting on with an inescapable blast of devastation. Sickening and blood-filled chakra thickly descended on the shoulders of those who were watching the fight, as Niji held onto his left arm, wounded by a broken-off branch that in his awe for the battle he had not even bothered to dodge. Niji! Tenten's shriek brought him back to the now as he blinked once in her direction. We have to leave. No, Niji replied calmly, before turning his gaze back to the battle. We cannot escape fate. This isn't about fate. We're going to die if we remain here. The kunoichi grabbed Niji by the hem of his clothes. If you don't plan on leaving, then I'm hauling your ass out. Lee. Come here. He didn't fight Rock Lee lifting and placing him on his back. He didn't even fight the embarrassing position he had ended up in. He simply watched with unyielding gaze the battle happening, activating his Byakugan the moment his line of sight was hindered. The instant he did so, he understood what being outclassed meant. Jiraiya of the Sun-In felt the chakra coming, lapping across the sky and the ground in waves filled of malice. He couldn't go for it however, as Orochimaru was directly in front of him, a smile slowly creeping across his once teammate's face. Was this your intention? Jiraiya whispered. Did you plan to unleash the Kyuubi? No, Orochimaru shook his head. My plan, really, the Snake Sun-In spoke wistfully, it was such a simple plan. Care to share? Jiraiya, the trader of the leaf shook his head, clothes of red clouds and silver interweaving flowing freely with the wind. You never saw the bigger picture, did you? Is Tsunade working for you, Orochi? The Toad Sun-In asked calmly. Has she betrayed the leaf? What if I say no and it is yes? And what if I say yes, and it is no? He cocked his head to the side. And what if I say yes and she says no? Or what if I say no and she says yes? Would you trust my word, hers, both or neither? There was a beat of silence. You sicken me, Jiraiya. Your stupidity and your blindness are disgusting to watch. There was a disgusted hiss following Orochimaru's words. Then again, you summon toads, you are repulsive by principle of things, are you not? Shouldn't slugs get the medal for being icky? Jiraiya could not divert his attention from Orochimaru. They both were talking, but this one, he knew this was the real Snake Sun-In and not a Doton clone. If he lost sight of the man even for a second, then he would lose. The same was true for the trader. You must also consider the summoner, Orochimaru said calmly. Do you know that holding someone's heart is a sure way to ensure loyalty? What then, if someone was to hold the souls of your most beloved ones? What if death was no longer a certainty, but merely a hurdle to overcome? Tell me, Jiraiya, what would you sacrifice, in exchange for another moment with your beloved ones? Jiraiya slowly ground his teeth. What are you talking about? You know of the Edo Tensei, Orochimaru spoke firmly. You must know of it, Sensei told you, didn't he? No, Jiraiya muttered. He didn't. What is it? A technique. You don't know. The Snake Sun-In blinked. The Toad Sage didn't move. The blink had been calculated to lure him in a trap. He knew how Orochimaru thought after all. No, enlighten me. Ask Sensei, the Snake Sun-In shrugged. I know. He told me. He asked me to research it. He asked me to perfect it, and then, here Orochimaru chuckled bitterly, and then he tried to drive a kunai through my heart. Wonderful example of paternal love, isn't it? You're lying. Sensei would never. He asked for results. Hours and days of research became weeks and months with nothing. And then he told me to stop. He told me it would be enough, that there wasn't a solution to the problem. Orochimaru screamed that, pointing his accusing finger at him. And you know what? He had the nerve to tell me I did wrong. That my tests and experiments on enemy shinobi were heartless. He told me to stop them. He told me to take on another team, do a few missions elsewhere. He took my lab. He took my experiments. He told me it was over, that I had failed and that I shouldn't be angry because, it happened. The Kusanagi came unsheathed from Orochimaru's back. Let me tell you, Jiraiya, that when you invest years of life in something and it is taken away, your perspective of things, your values, the importance you give to the rest of the things you possess, it changes, drastically, wistfully. He looked up at the sky. You know, I considered Anko like a daughter, now I only see a walking sack of flesh that I can experiment upon, or that I can make suffer. His laughter was mirthless. Tell me, am I broken, Jiraiya? Or was I broken? You're lying. And you still wonder why you disgust me, old friend, Orochimaru grinned. Never seen the bigger picture, never will. And then the Kusanagi was met with a stone sword from the Mount of Toads itself, as the two legendary shinobi locked one against the other in a battle of speed and reflexes where sparks flew in the air upon contact of the two blades with one another. The darkness that surrounded Naruto was filled with cries. He heard screams, whimpers, pleads, and grieving calls for help. The Kyuubi at his side simply sat down, smirking in wait. "Go on, don't let me hold you back," he said simply, nudging him forward. "Watch misery, watch humankind's despair and grief. Watch what your fellow man does to another, feel the tears run down your cheeks and then ask yourself, ask if my work is without purpose." Naruto took a single step forward, and then the screams that had been incoherent babble until then became understandable. "Mommy? Where are you, Mommy? Daddy? Help me. Stop it please. They're only children. No. What is our fault? We didn't do anything. We didn't ask to be born with bloodlines. Stop it. It hurts. Help. Help me. Mom. Dad? Someone. It's dark in here, someone, anyone. I feel sick, where are you, Mom? Don't walk my path, Amaru, please, don't walk my path. Why are you taking me away? I didn't do anything wrong. I am not a monster. Please, I'm not at fault, I promise I'll be good. What have I done wrong, why am I here? Please let me out. It was my wife. Not the Lord's. He had no right, no right. Please stop. Don't. Screams. Cries. Tears. Sadness and grief that were nothing more than misery that asked for more. There was no hope. There was nothing but the crushing despair that turned to the darkest thoughts of mankind itself. Malice at least, malice is action, Kurama's voice whispered at Naruto's ears, as his heart felt clenched by the mere tone the words, the calls for help held. Misery is nothing more than uttermost despair. It is to suffer, it is crushing, isn't it? And for all their calls of strength concerning my powers, I always thought Shukaku was the one with the strongest soul. He could smile, even when his entire being was composed of this. He could laugh and play, just like a child, even when his burden was maybe the heaviest out of us all. So tell me Naruto, is it worth it to fight for humanity? Do you know how many die of hunger, thirst, abandoned by their only chance of survival? How many cry in the dark cells for crimes they have not committed, forever cast away from the light? I didn't poison Naruto-kun. Please, I didn't. Naruto's eyes widened. Ayam. Ayam. It wasn't me, the voice sobbed. I didn't do it. Please. I'm sorry. I didn't do it. I loved him like a brother, please, you have to believe me, I didn't do it. Where is she? Nowhere, Kurama remarked. Her despair is just added to that of Shukaku. Her thoughts are nothing more than the yin chakra that composes him, just as nature itself is our yang side. Why do you think I am not a gibbering mess of stupidity, even with my yin side sealed by the Shinigami? What? You don't know. Kurama raised an eyebrow. Your Hokage thought the seal would not be enough to contain all of me, and so he sealed away with him only my yin half. Know this, had he actually succeeded and had I not held on to a bare minimum, you wouldn't be talking to me, as much as fending off every single attack of a fox blabbering like a raving lunatic. Yin chakra is what makes us think, it is what defines us to the world. Without it, we are nothing more than masses of chakra bound to our only purpose of destruction, and if we can't think, then we do not even recall what we have to destroy. So, Ayam, she was innocent. That depends, Kurama replied. In the deepest pits of despair she cried out her innocence. Either she lied to her very soul when she said those words, or at the very least she meant every single one of them, or she might have simply chosen to forget about it. You humans do that when traumatic experiences happen after all. Sob, uncle? Where are you? The voice of Gaara caught Naruto's attention, as he turned his gaze to the scene of a young boy crying out as he held onto a teddy bear, tears running down the chins of what was now the monster he was fighting. Am I human? Why can't I bleed like the others? I am so sorry, Gaara, the uncle in question whispered, only to his very mind, as the scene morphed to a tear-stricken Gaara on a rooftop, moments before he carved the kanji for love on his forehead while screaming out in maddening grief his last tears. "Shukaku! Where are you, brother?" Kurama's voice barked through the pitch-black darkness. "Stop hiding away. You called me here, through the dreamscape of chakra. We used to play hide-and-seek a lot, brother," another voice spoke as a figure took a single step forward from the darkness. It was a child, with deep golden hair and striking blue eyes. He had 2 earrings on his ear, on the upper side. He wore a simple robe, the color of the sand. His skin was pale as he held onto a simple leather ball. "You don't like playing with me anymore?" "It's not that, Shukaku," Kurama whispered back softly, his crimson gaze landing on the small humanoid figure. "What have they done to you? Do you remember now? Have you recalled? Is my presence enough, brother?" "It was dark and cramped for a long time," Shukaku muttered. "Then they tried to put me in people. People cannot withstand my power for long. At night the misery would seep through, their thoughts would become muddled by mine, and so they thought it my fault. When I broke free I was lost. I had lost many pieces. Who I was, what I had to do, I couldn't recall much. Was I Shukaku? Was I the Ichibai? A weapon, a Baijuyua? Was I a demon, brother? Were we demons back then, with father? Why did he never call us demons then? I couldn't understand. They never answered me." The boy bit his lower lip. "I tried to be good. Their seals were shoddy. I did my best, but then I lost more pieces. Every time they brought me back, I lost pieces. I was afraid, brother, I was so much afraid." Tears swelled in the boy's eyes. "What if I hurt more? I didn't want misery to grow. I didn't want to hear the screams of the orphans, the cries of the widows. I didn't want more. I just wanted it to end." He closed his eyes shut. "I'm selfish, brother," he whispered. "But I can't do this, I lost too many pieces. Why was I fighting to begin with? What did father tell me, that I forgot? What was it that I had found, that gave me the strength to go on? He told me, didn't he? He told all of us, but I can't remember. I don't have long anymore. Shukaku, Madatabi, Isabu, Sungaku, Kokuo, Seiken, Kome, Jayaki, Kurama. Even though you have been separated, you shall always be together." Kurama whispered, his eyes gleaming slightly from tears. Naruto watched the scene unfold and the words being spoken without breathing, his heart clenching painfully as the words simply came out from the Kyubai's mouth one after the other. "Even though your burden is great, even though my selfishness imposes this on you, know that I would not entrust this to anyone else, because I love you, my precious children." "It feels nice," Shukaku whispered back. "It's warm," he added with his right hand touching his chest. "Was that what gave me strength?" Kurama did not answer, but merely lowered his giant fox head until the tip of his nose touched Shukaku's humanoid frame. "Brother, are you sure?" "I'm sorry," Shukaku whispered once more, "but, this warmth, I want to go while I still remember it. I don't want to lose this warmth again, please." Shukaku's plead finished just as the Kyuubi raised once more its head upwards. "It's all right to be selfish once, brother," Kurama whispered finally, his voice actually cracked. And then his jaws crunched down on Shukaku itself, swallowing him whole with a single movement. Naruto's eyes widened, but he couldn't even scream as the roar of agony of the Kyuubi drowned out any protest, as the soul-rending shriek pierced through the darkness itself and slammed him outside, away from the Kyuubi's lament. Naruto's eyes opened to his mouth firmly settled into the lukewarm entrails of the Tsunagaku or shinobi known as Gaara. No, to be more precise, his mouth had been feasting on the enemy's chakra coils. He had feasted on the source of chakra itself from a body, he had eaten Shukaku. The sand lay down on the ground motionless, as all around him was nothing more than devastation and torn-apart trees. There wasn't a forest anymore around, but just a desert of sand. The trees themselves, which stood beyond the now larger field, were covered with a light sprinkle of golden grains. No one was around him, as he felt his skin burn while chakra healed his body. He looked at his skin, that appeared flailed out and that was now closing up with unparalleled speed. His clothes were torn to shreds, barely covering his body as he tried to stand up only to fall on his back and gasp for air, coughing out blood that he knew wasn't his, but only of the enemy. The enemy he had killed. The boy who had no fault but that of having been born as he was, where he was, and that had suffered beyond what a normal boy was meant to. "I'm sorry," he whispered out. "Your uncle really loved you," he added then, as tears began to streak down his face. There was no other way. Naruto. There was a blur of pink hair as soft arms suddenly encircled him, a face digging deep on his shoulder as he felt Sakura's body press against his. The girl was sobbing uncontrollably, she clutched him tightly as if afraid he'd slip away. "Never again. Never, sob, never again, do you hear me?" She cried hard against his shoulder, mumbling, "I was so scared. I thought you were dead and then you came out different and you attacked him. I didn't want to leave you, but Sai the bastard grabbed me and pulled me away. He rambled about bestiality or something and I hit him a few times, but then I dashed back here just as I heard the sound of battle winding down and, please tell me you're fine." She looked at him, her emerald eyes filled with tears. "Are you hurt? You aren't hurt, are you, Naruto?" "And no," he croaked out. I'm fine. Thank Kami," she hugged him again firmly. "Thank Kami." "Dickless," Sai's voice quipped in as he appeared in a flicker a moment later. "Can you fight?" Naruto's eyes went up to where the boy was, before frowning. I feel fine, Sai." "Good," the boy nodded, before handing over one of the scrolls to him. "This is the Suna's team scroll. You hold it." "Sai!" Sakura exclaimed angrily. "You can't just hand it over like that. Naruto, stop acting tough. You can't be fine. Just look at you, you're..." She suddenly blushed and took a small jump away. "You're half naked." "Oh." Sai raised an eyebrow. "You weren't actually assaulting him, Kinky Cherry." The pale boy cocked his head to the side. "I thought you were a rapist too. You did kiss him by force earlier." Sakura's face turned crimson as she stuttered and flailed her hands and arms wildly in front of her. That's not true. I wasn't, it's not the same thing. I was, they were, it's not what you think, Sai. It was between teammates." Sai took a slight step backwards. "I don't want to be kissed by you, Kinky. I fear for my purity. I wasn't going to wait a moment. Why are you making it sound like you're an innocent maiden or something? I'm the one who has to listen to you spouting nonsense with dicks all day. Where are the others?" Naruto asked then, looking around in surprise. "They ran," Sai deadpanned. Nara and Akimichi ran towards the tower. Team 9 moved away, probably to get their stashed scrolls. Team Otagakuer is pursuing Team 8, and the Suna Shinobi. "Naruto-kun." A female voice suddenly made Sakura's forehead sport a tick mark, as the crimson-haired Uzumaki Kunoichi waved her hand as she ran forward, before stopping down next to him and hugging him. "The skank. The whore. How dared she?" "I was so worried," Karen whispered in fright, "but I saw you fight and you were wonderful." The Sunajin hierarchy didn't stand a chance. Naruto's face clouded at the memory, but why was he more saddened for Shukaku's death than Gaara's? "Don't murder my brother before having seen his corpse, brat." Kurama's grumble reached his ears then. "We are constructs of chakra. We do not die. He and I are now one." Naruto didn't answer, as his gaze landed on the two surviving Sunagakuer shinobi who were slowly advancing towards them, their mouths opened in awe and fear as they looked at him. Sakura must have realized he was actually looking at someone, because she was suddenly holding a kunao in her hand and had spun around, protectively standing in front of Naruto. Sai's own Tonto had come unsheathed, as he too had the same thought. The kunoichi just raised her hands in the air slightly. "Whoa, calm down," she said. "We don't want to fight," she added. "You just killed Gaara. It's something not even the Kazekige's chosen assassins could do. We're not suicidal. We gave you the scroll, right?" She added, "We're just here to get his body, nothing more, unless he wants to eat it." The last part had been asked with hesitation. It wasn't sarcasm, but outright fear that Naruto might have actually liked to eat corpses. Sakura narrowed her eyes on the duo. And why would you want the body back? Does it hold any secret? He's the Kazekige's son, Tamari said calmly. Blood seals tied to being his children would work with someone using his blood, for example. He never bled, Naruto said then dully. You're lying. Sakura's hold on the kunao tightened. And how do you know that? Tamari asked then. You're his sister, right? Naruto's voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough to be heard by the kunoichi. So what if I am? Did you talk to him while fighting, and he actually answered? No, Naruto shook his head. I talked to his soul. He was swallowed in misery and despair, nobody ever loved him, right? How could you love a monster? She snorted back. He was always about, talk and I'll kill you, and things like that. Kankuro exclaimed then, how do you love someone who only thinks about killing you? He knew, Naruto said then with dull eyes. Shukaku told him. He wasn't holding you away for anger, and he wasn't acting like a psychopath for his own gain. If he had acted like a brother to you, your own father would have sent both of you to kill him. He protected you by keeping his distance, so have some respect for the dead at least. Slowly, Naruto stood up. When you go back to your father, try and ask him if he ordered your uncle to kill Gaara. He might lie, but the truth is that he did give that order, and the fact the order was obeyed is what brought us to this. If he wants to fault someone, he can fault himself. What proof do you have? Kankuro asked then bewildered. I mean, do you have anything solid? He's not only our father, but also the Kage of Suna, unless dash. Shukaku whispered of misery, Naruto replied calmly. And your uncle's last thought were of despairing grief for what he had done. There was a moment of silence, where only the wind blew in the desert-like clearing. See, can we bring him home? Tamari asked finally with a cracked voice, her eyes slightly humid. Take him and go, Naruto said then with a nod. Wait out the time limit near a gate and leave, it's for the best. Tamari's hand grabbed the light weight that was Gaara's corpse, before jumping back and starting to run away with Kankuro in tow. She held the dead body of her younger brother, the one she used to talk to when he was still in her mother's tummy. She had already planned to be the bossy sister, to make sure he'd always be prim and proper, and there he was now, dead. Life has a way of going against plans, but her eyes hardened then, because if her father had done this to her brother, and if her brother had kept them away only to keep them safe, she'd commit treason gladly, because her brother hadn't earned this, and nobody, no one, not a single living being deserved what Gaara had gone through, and she'd make sure the lesson would stick, no matter what. Kankuro remained quiet. His thoughts drifted back to home. What was their father going to say? Gaara had been the Jinhuriki of the Ichibai, and he had died. The plan to invade Konoha, to siege the village, it had just gone up in flames. And if their Jinhuriki was that strong, then what hope had they had in the first time? Their father had to be talked out of this, as fast as possible. Kiba cursed out loudly. The arrow had pierced through the sides. The true aim of the archer had probably been to sever the spine, but thankfully his chunky movements had alerted Hinata, who had turned enough to avoid that fatal blow. Shino had been a life savior, creating a diversion of bugs to make sure they managed to lose their pursuers as they hid in a thick undergrowth patch of leaves. He had quickly extracted the arrow and bandaged the wound. There had been no other choice. The arrow could have been poisoned after all before checking for anything to stem the blood loss. She would survive anyway, but unless aptly treated, she was prone to losing her mobility because of the wound. The only problem was that his umbu supplies would have been more than enough, but his genin assigned ones? Not at all. He had been ordered not to intervene during the exam, to surrender before the start of the third test. He was simply tasked with stopping the death of the Hyuga heiress, not of making sure she could continue her genin career unscathed. He had a choice to make. The girl was shivering, sweat falling down her face as she groaned and moaned in pain, her mouth clenching tightly against a chunk of wood. He had a choice. And he would have to live with it, no matter what it was that he chose. Chapter 25, The Blood Drying in the Darkness. Jiraiya limped back to the tower, holding onto the charring black limb that once was his left arm. He had won. His teammate had been quicker, faster, and he had barely escaped with his life, but he had won. Orochimaru had retreated first. That was what the Toad Sage was thinking, as he wobbled up the stairs and was soon brought in the infirmary of the tower by the medic Jounin assigned to it. He wondered how his ex-teammate had managed to retain the same speed as in youth, but then again he already had many thoughts going around his mind, the Edo Tensei not the last of them. The Kyuubi's presence had disappeared, and since there was no Ichibai frolicking around, it either meant his godson had worked it out, or Orochimaru's plan had come to fruition. In any case, he could do nothing more than rest and hope to flush out whatever poisons the Kusanagi had excreted. One thing however was unmistakable: Orochimaru worked for Akatsuki. The clouds on his cloak were proof of that. As the Toad-san mulled over dark thoughts, Naruto Uzumaki was looking with a half-interested gaze at the dinner his teammates had managed to procure. Mushrooms that Sai had given the green light to were tinged in polka dots, while strange tooth-filled creatures that resembled rabbits had been given a warily comestible value. Cooking the stuff hadn't required much precaution. The burnt skin of the fish he currently hefted out on a stick smelled sort of good, and in the pinch they were in would work wonders. He gazed to his right side, where Sakura seemed to be busying herself with cleaning and maintaining her kunao, while on his left Karin was yawning slightly, every now and then dropping her head against his shoulder. He didn't know why, but it felt like being between a rock and a hard place. "Is it ready?" Karin mumbled sleepily, purring as her cheek seemed to be pressing gently against his shoulder. "What are you, 5?" Sakura snapped back angrily. "Stand up tight for Kami's sake," she muttered. "You insufferable flirt." Sai remained conveniently quiet in his corner, as he watched with impassiveness the two kunoichi glare at one another. He could swear there was a small line of electricity running across their eyes and meeting in the center, but then again it was probably the byproduct of being tired. They were resting behind a large tree, having covered the sides with larger plants and wide leaves. The third day was announcing itself to be extremely long, especially if this was how it began. "Do we keep looking for more scrolls?" Sai asked, hoping to remove the tension. "I don't know," Sakura mumbled. "We have one. We can let Naruto pass and—" "Why me?" Naruto asked then carefully. "You or Sai should claim the scroll. I'm not so sure I want to keep going on the exam, especially alone." Well, Sakura blushed slightly. "We'd have to find the other scrolls. Unless we have a tracker, then we're—" Her gaze went to Karin, who suddenly found herself the center of the attention of everyone else. She made a hesitant smile. I can find chakra, not objects." "Look for 3-member teams going to the tower," Naruto quipped. "Shikamaru and Chuji won't be participating any longer, I think, and since one team with 3 scrolls is clearly the Uegakuer one." "Oh right," Sakura clenched her right fist with a sadistic smirk. "They have a whore I need to settle a score with." "Cherry, didn't they ever tell you never to kiss and tell?" Sai asked calmly, moving his head slightly to the side as silence descended in the clearing once more. "What are you talking about, SA?" Sakura's eyes widened as the second meaning of Sai's words settled in. The moment it did, Sakura ground her teeth furiously. "Sai!" She charged ahead with murder in her eyes, grabbing the boy by the rim of his clothes and moving him furiously back and forth. "You perverted man!" Naruto chuckled. He chuckled and slowly shook his head as he turned his gaze sideways. "You can come out," he announced clearly. "We know you're there." In a moment, Sakura's action became clear as Sai's form disappeared in an ink clone. Her distraction had served its purpose, as Shino found himself stepping forward with both hands up in the air and a tanto clearly poised to strike him from the back. Sakura had already taken out 3 needles, and was taking careful aim for the Abarame. "Interesting. I thought I had covered my tracks perfectly. How did you find me?" "You smell," Naruto retorted calmly. "Of honey." Shino raised an eyebrow for a moment, before comprehension seemed to dawn on his face. "Ah, pheromones to guide the Kikaicha. I didn't expect your nose was able to sense them. Is that another thing of having the Kyuubi sealed within you?" As soon as he asked, Sai's tanto moved just a little bit closer as Sakura prepared herself to fire her needles. "What do you want?" the pink-haired kunoichi hissed. "We're not giving you our scroll." "I do not want that," Shino replied calmly, shaking his head. I have come to terms with the fact this exam will be my loss. Hinata has been grievously wounded, and we are moving towards the gate as we speak. We. Naruto remarked quizzically. He's a Kikaicha clone, Karen deadpanned, her eyes settling on the genin. It takes skill to hold one for so long. I thank you, the mass of insects remarked. However, time is of the essence. I have marked Team 9 with females from this swarm. The moment this clone disappears, the insects will fly towards their location. Should you wish for their stash of scrolls, then most certainly this should be considered, an olive branch from the Abarame clan to Uzumaki-san. What are you talking about? Sakura's eyes were still narrowed in distrust. Why should we trust you? Why? Because I have no reason to go against someone who can clearly outclass me. Furthermore, cooperation now may result in future benefits between my clan and him. He is the Jinhiriki of Konoha, allying with him is the most sane and logical course of action in any event, short of being friends with the Hokage. Why didn't anyone else try this before? Naruto muttered with his eyes glazed over. I mean this ally thing. Uzumaki-san, Shino's clone actually brought his clone bug glasses back to the top of his nose. Who says they didn't try? All clans were stonewalled in the face of equity. The Hokage alone should hold sway over the Jinhiriki, and by that I intend that the Sarutobi clan could not come in contact with you either. That is the logical thing. You are, after all, the most dangerous individual of the village whether you understand it or not. Shino calmly looked to the sky. This clone has now served its primary purpose and will disengage back into a mindless swarm. Choose quickly. True to his words, Shino deformed into a mass of bugs that soon began to fly in a specific direction. Do we follow him? Sai asked once, only to receive a nod from both Sakura and Naruto. The breakfast wasn't forgotten, it was just eaten along the way. The rabbit tastes like jelly, Naruto grimaced as he jumped and took a bite at the same time, his eyes focused on the swarm of bugs. Had worse, but it's disgusting. Want to swap with the mushrooms? Sakura queried back calmly. They taste like carton, except the dot area, those are spicy like pepper. Should we really be doing this? Karen asked worriedly. I mean, with everything that happened the day before, shouldn't Naruto-kun rest? Don't act too familiar with my teammate, Sakura snapped curtly back at the crimson-haired girl. And it's Naruto's decision. No, it's ours, Naruto remarked calmly. If someone doesn't want to, then nobody will. We'll give the last scroll to you, Karen, and that will be that. Oh, Karen-kun, how noble of you. You just know what to say to a woman to capture their heart, don't you, Naruto-kun? Tisk. Shameless flirting bitch, Sakura mumbled with her eyes half closed in disgust. She had never been like that with Sasuke, had she? She shuddered. Of course she hadn't, that was in the past. An old Sakura had done that. She hadn't. She wasn't going to. She's go for a mature and composed approach. She wouldn't flirt, she'd romance. Was that how it worked between adults? She had to ask her mother how she had managed to get father to love her. And maybe polish her cooking skills. Sakura. Watch out. It was in that moment that her neck felt the tension of a steel wire, before her body was pushed backwards by the strength of an explosion. She had been so stupid, lost in daydreams as she was, she hadn't considered traps to have been placed by their targets. She felt blood slowly trickle down from her throat. Had it been sliced? She was falling on the ground from the top of the trees. Wasn't the fall lethal from that height? She couldn't find the strength to balance herself, her ears were ringing and her sight blurring. Why hadn't the explosion pulverized her? She realized there was a weight that had tackled her from her midsection. She looked at the back of a figure covered in shrapnel and steel bits and pieces. The hair was black. The skin was pale. Sai had covered for her. She lost consciousness the next moment, as she felt the momentum of the fall stop abruptly. Naruto had probably saved them both, hadn't he? Meanwhile, Sasuke Uchiha was slowly walking towards the medic bay. The Chiryunin, Kabuto Yakushi, had quietly come over the night before to talk about attacking. He had apparently known his older brother for a bit, and seemed more than willing to tell him more should he wish to know about his older brother's days in Umbu. The medic Chiryunin had apparently healed him quite a bit during that period, and Suzuki was curious, because any old wound badly healed could be a weakness to exploit. He reached for the medic bay and opened the door with his left hand. His right arm was still in a cast, but it was going to come away any day now, and then he could finally start training. He entered to a sterile and green-colored environment with 3 white beds perfectly made and a pair of curtains separating them. On the side was Kabuto Yakushi, sitting at the nurse's desk with both his arms crossed over and his face sideways, sleeping. The light breathing of the Chiryunin startled Suzuki. Maybe he should have come later? Still, the other older boy wasn't a Chiryunin for nothing, as he slowly woke up the moment he took a step inside the room. "I'll be right there, Suzuki," Kabuto smiled as he stood up, scratching the back of his head in a abashed manner. "I'm actually embarrassed you saw me defenseless like that," he chuckled. "My sensei would kill me if he found out. Anyway, what can I do for you? Are you scheduled to have the cast removed?" "Itake," Suzuki said curtly. "What else do you know about him?" That's a broad question," Kabuto remarked. "One best answered while sitting." "Sit on the bed, I'll take the chair and move closer." Suzuki did that, annoyed slightly at the delay. Then again, if he was to receive a lot of information it made sense. The pale-haired Chiryunin sat down near him, before crossing his arms over his chest and assuming a thoughtful position. "Well," he began carefully. "What interests you the most?" "His strength," Suzuki was quick to come to the answer. "How did he become so strong?" "He killed the entire clan in a single night, and nobody realized it." "How could he do that alone?" "The Uchiha were the strongest." "No, they are the strongest." "That's an interesting question," Kabuto stated calmly. "His Umbu training certainly helped him a great deal, but what truly made him strong?" "That." The boy began to muse over it for a while. "I think it was the desire to always prove himself. He always trained harder than any others, and he always fought harder than anyone else." "That's no different than what I am doing," Suzuki hissed, "and yet I'm still not as strong as him. He was stronger than me by my age. He was already Umbu." "Well, maybe he met someone during his missions," Kabuto said then. "If he trained in Konoha and you did too, then it comes to term that he must have trained also outside of the village." "But with who?" Suzuki remarked. "It's simple, really," Kabuto stated calmly. "If he did train outside, it had to be with one of the Sunin or an S-rank shinobi at the very least. Maybe he met with Tsunade Senju? No, that would have made him a good healer rather than a killer. Jiraiya of the Sunin could be an answer. So it was because he had a good teacher. No, an excellent one," Suzuki finally stated. "Highly possible," Kabuto nodded. "Then again he always fought as if every battle was to the death. Maybe that made him stronger too." "Our sensei told us to come at him with the intent to kill," Suzuki mumbled. "Maybe I should try." "That's your decision, Suzuki," Kabuto commented. "You know, he used to talk about you a great deal," he added as if it was an afterthought. "He called you a troublesome little brother." A nervous tick mark appeared on Suzuki's forehead. "He said anything else?" Kabuto smiled for a moment, before adding. "He said he used to give you a flick on the forehead and tell you, another time, if only to keep you quiet for the day." There was a wistful look on Kabuto's face. "He loved you dearly all the same." "Yet he slaughtered the entire clan and let me live because I was weak," Suzuki hissed back. "Why? Why did he kill mother and father?" "You know, Suzuki," Kabuto remarked calmly. "If he had wanted to let the weak live, then why did he also kill the children?" The Chiryunin asked with curiosity. "He called you too weak to be worth it, but you certainly were stronger than an infant, weren't you? Yet he mercilessly slaughtered everyone but you." Silence descended in the infirmary. "It sounds to me he either actually cared about you," Kabuto added slowly, "or someone ordered him to spare you." But who would order him that?" Suzuki whispered with wide eyes. He was Umbu," they answered directly to the, and his throat clenched tightly as he realized just what that thought led to. "But the Uchiha were." "Well, I can't say there's any proof around," Kabuto remarked, "but then again, why are you alive if Itake really didn't love you? And why aren't the children alive, if he didn't kill the weak? And what of the elderly?" I don't know, his eyes closed shut. I'll have to ask him. How can I? You should become stronger, Kabuto nodded sagely. If you wish, I know just the thing, it is experimental, and has a high chance of being mortal, but if you survive, then it will make you undoubtedly stronger than any other of your peers, maybe even on par with Itachi himself. Sasuke's eyes narrowed down. Why are you helping me, Kabuto-san? Because, Kabuto replied with a small smile, I lost my family to betrayal too once. He shook his head with grief coming out from his tone. Only, I never even had a chance for revenge, you, on the other hand, have. I need time to think. Hastily, Sasuke stood up and walked towards the door. Take all the time you need, Kabuto replied, waving him off. Unknown to the Uchiha, the wickedest smile ever to be seen had just then sprouted on the face of the medic Chiryunin, as the retreating back of Sasuke disappeared from view. Kuratsuka looked at the dead bodies of the 3 Uegakuer shinobi that had taken the exam together with her. Somebody had not only killed them, but also apparently devoured their innards and used their exterior as a camouflage technique. She gritted her teeth as she kicked a nearby rock against a tree. 3 shinobi dead, she muttered. 3 shinobi from Uegakuer dead and, arg, this reeks of Konoha politics. She looked at Hibachi and then at Akatsuki. You two, set a perimeter. We are not going to let any Konoha team pass through, understood? We'll teach them to. The ground rumbled and shook as a green spandex-clad Konoha shinobi literally dashed past them with unforeseen speed. There was a moment of silence, where not even Kuratsuka dared to speak. Then, finally, it was Akatsuki who decided to state the obvious. Fast. What the hell was that? Kuratsuka screamed then. Kuratsuka-sama, Hibachi said calmly. I think the thing had his teammates on his shoulders. A nervous tick mark appeared on the kunoichi's forehead. After them, then. They're mine, a voice calmly stated from behind her. She spun around just in time to be on the receiving end of a gut punch, one that drove her very breath away as her mouth opened in shock. Her eyes were wide as she watched the Jinhiriki of the Kyuubi stare at her with cold crimson eyes charged with disgust. They harmed my team, he hissed then. But you will do as an appetizer, the Kyuubi smiled sweetly, before plunging his right hand straight through her abdomen. She screamed in pain as he held her close, his left hand circling her shoulders as he spoke softly to her ear. You know, Yang Chakra heals wounds quickly. I can actually cauterize and heal your wound time and time again, before breaking it apart time and time again. This had to be the Kyuubi taking control, it couldn't be the Konoha genin that spoke with such malice, and the pain is excruciating. Literally, it is one of the strongest things I have ever felt and watched. His crimson twin tails slashed away at an incoming fist from Akatsuki, the stupid idiot trying to stop the monster from killing her. She felt blood ooze out of her mouth, coppery and bitter to the taste as the tails stopped the stone-encrusted fist of her teammate and sent the genin to fly back and crash against a tree bark. Hibachi wasn't even trying. In the back of her mind she realized he would probably be happy if she did die, he'd have his family next in the line of succeeding the Tsuchikage after all. You know, the Jinhiriki commented. I am going to take your scrolls. It is far easier than to pursue the other 3. I will find them in the finals again after all, and there I will personally butcher all 3 of them. His eyes flickered with amusement from Hibachi to her, and then again. You should choose your allies more carefully next time. He removed his fist from her body just as she saw the darkness at the corner of her eyesight. Her arms went down protectively to her stomach, that wasn't even sporting a wound. But the pain had been there, and she had felt it all the same. Your blood tastes sweet, by the way, the Kyuubi coldly remarked, lapping his bloodied hand. And your chakra is bitter and filled with a malice you can't even discern. Ah, spoiled children are a course I've had quite my fill in youth. He grabbed her chin with his left hand, and then roughly kissed her back, his tongue licking her teeth for the blood she had felt the taste of in her mouth. She widened her eyes as the Kyuubi removed himself from her lips, before giving her one simple wink. I felt the need to return the favor of last time, he spoke firmly, as an answer. The Kyuubi wearing the skin of its Jinhiriki then walked towards Hibachi calmly, leaving behind a dumbfounded Kuratsuki who had slowly brought 2 fingers from her right hand to touch her bloodied lips. Give me the scrolls, before I decide killing you is worth my time. The bug user trembled in fright as he immediately handed over his entire bag. The stupid moron was going to get them killed. She couldn't stand because of the phantom pain still running across her body, but as she lay down there holding onto her stomach area, shuddering from the mere presence of such a monster near them, she felt a small weight thrown at her chest. She looked with shock as one scroll was flung at her from the Kyuubi himself, a smile gracing the lips of the boy in question. "I will taste your blood in the finals. Do not think you can escape me." The Kyuubi laughed. "The time spent stewing your fears will be my sweetest nectar, and I would be very angry, should you waste my time." Then, with a simple nod in Kuratsuka's direction, he jumped away. The moment Naruto dropped down in the clearing near Karen and his two wounded teammates, the chakra cloak that surrounded him disappeared. He wobbled for an instant, before steadying himself and firmly grasping at the hilt of his tanto. "How are they?" "They're stable," Karen said, turning around slightly to watch him. "Did you catch on to the other team?" The Kyuubi refused. "I don't know what he did, I lost consciousness and all I remember is a red haze, but I have 2 more scrolls now," he mumbled. "Maybe he killed 2 of them teammates." "Why don't you ask him?" she said back as she grabbed a clean piece of cloth to wash away the dirt from another of Sai's wounds. The pale-skinned boy's back was riddled with shrapnel, the steel bits having no specific form and thus forcing Karen to open the wounds even more to remove them one after the other. I don't think he's going to answer me anyway," Naruto shook his head. "He doesn't do things because he wants to help me. He does things because they help him in the long run." He blinked once. "He says that should be obvious." "Your girlfriend got lucky by the way," Karen said calmly as she gestured towards Sakura's limp form. There was gauze around her neck, blotched with crimson from the bleeding wound probably. 1 centimeter more and the steel wire would have cut through a few important blood vessels. "She was lucky. Sai kept an eye out for her," Naruto remarked. "I should have too." He sighed, exhausted, as he dropped his back down against a tree trunk. "We have 3 scrolls, don't you want one?" "No," Karen shook her head. I don't want to. Maybe I'll stay a gen in a few more years," she added. "Plus, they say it's easier to be traded as a genin than as a Chiryunin from village to village," she said wistfully. "I still can't believe there's another Uzumaki around, in Konoha, no less." "You said something similar the last time too," Naruto pointed out. "What about your parents?" "Raiders killed them," she snorted. "And the Uzumaki have separated since the fall of Uzushio." She bit her lips. "You haven't read about it." "I have but..." Naruto grimaced, "There's not much in the library to go by. They simply stop mentioning the village after the last war." "Course they do," Karen rolled her eyes. "Konoha left Uzushio to die after all." She steeled her gaze. Kirigakure attacked from the sea, while Kumigakure came from the north. Uzushio was in the middle and was struck down, and then Konoha came by later, claiming to be our savior. She spat out to the side, while in truth they just claimed our territory for their own country. And what did we get back? They sew a whirlpool over their flak jackets. Wow, wonderful way of repaying our country's seal masters, our country's destruction, a fucking piece of cloth. That's the worth of Uzushio now in Konoha's memory, and many don't even know that. Weren't the Senju and Uzumaki allies? He asked. I recall a Mito Uzumaki that. Mito Uzumaki was the head of the clan Uzumaki back in the days when Uzushio was powerful. She married into the Senju line in order to keep the two countries allied, but annexation was never on the table. Karen bit her lips. The death of the first Hokage and the rise of the second didn't change things, but by the time the third war began Konoha was grievously indebted because of the warfare effort. She shook her head with a mirthless chuckle. Seals are powerful. Jinhiriki are the prime example. Think of the power to hold at bay the Kyuubi. And it's just ink and chakra, isn't it? Such power, it bred jealousy. Karen closed her eyes shut. Uzushio was protected by such a complex array of seals that the only way in was to either be an ally or be someone with no ill intentions against the village. The crimson-haired girl smiled bitterly. Somebody showed the way into Kiri Shinobi, and that night Uzushio burned. Shinobi, civilians, men, or women didn't matter as their corpses floated in the crimson water of their docks. Building crashed down by the dozen as chakra techniques clashed throughout the city. By the end of it, Kyomagakuer attacked the fleeing masses barely outside the village. My mother always told me that the only way for them to know where the escape routes were, was to have been told by someone the Ozashio government trusted. Tears slowly pooled down Karen's face as she choked out a half-strangled sob. And all this, it happened after Mito Uzumaki died. Naruto clenched his fists. He didn't feel as strongly as Karen this loss of his hometown. He had never been born anywhere else, and he had never actually met in the flesh his parents. He was saddened he'd never meet more than stragglers of what once was supposed to be his cultural heritage, but he was actually sadder that Karen was crying out in frustration for what had happened decades before. He slowly moved closer to the crying girl and hugged her gently, feeling embarrassed as he began to softly caress her red hair. He felt her hands grip firmly onto his clothes, before lowering his gaze to stare at her own shining crimson orbs. She was looking at him with something akin to hope, as slowly her face came closer and closer to his and her eyes began to close. He watched her lips pucker up slightly as she was inches away from pressing her lips against his. Her lips had a light reddish hue of lipstick, and they looked so inviting actually that he was just about to move forward when... Dickless, Sai's monotone drawl actually broke the entire atmosphere, bringing Karen backwards embarrassedly and turning to face Sai who was eyeing them from his spot on the ground. "Should I change your nickname to Harem Lord?" Sai. With a scream of relief, Naruto jumped right next to the wounded boy. "Are you alright?" "I'll be operative within tomorrow," he remarked calmly. "Kinky cherry." "She's still unconscious." Naruto bit his lips as he looked over to the laid-down form of Sakura. "And what's that about being a harem lord?" "Dickless, I have eyes." "Obviously," Naruto deadpanned back. "But I don't understand what you're..." Naruto froze. He had been kissed, hadn't he? "The first doesn't count," he exclaimed, "and the second was on the cheek, really. The third one was, can I..." As he stuttered and stammered, Sai merely looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "Dickless, I can't believe you hadn't realized it yet," Sai deadpanned. "Are you without a brain or what?" "Excuse me. I was worried about not dying, and you know, it's not easy to have to fight through an entire chakra mess of misery and then end up thrown right or left because there's an exam to pass. For Kami's sakes, I didn't have time to think even as I went in pursuit of the bastards who did this to you too." "Should I be touched?" Sai remarked calmly. "This isn't a double meaning. If you dare touch me I will chop your hand off. Keep your harem to females only, Dickless." Naruto's shoulders began to move up and down as the Jinhiraki's eyes closed. A hearty chuckle escaped his throat, soon followed by a slight shaking of the head. "Never change, Sai," he said simply. "Clothes would start to stink after 2 days, he retorted. "No, I meant, you know what?" "Never mind," Naruto sighed. "Karen, can we move Sakura?" "No. At least not until the night is over," she quickly said. Slightly blushing, the kunoichi from Kyuzagakuer moved to take care of Sai's back once more, remaining silent as the two teammates bantered one with the other about size of dicks and proportions related to the number of women around Naruto. She blushed more than once, but the slight feeling of warmth that her heart was feeling there and then remained lit all throughout the day. So much so that it actually stung, when she dipped the clothes in a low-action long-term poison before cleaning Sai and Sakura's wounds once more. Then again, Orochimaru-sama had given her an order, and who was she to refuse? The fourth day Sakura was still unconscious, while Sai was instead up and moving albeit slowly around the camp. "One more day to go," he remarked. "We should move carefully towards the tower," he added then. "Do you think they planned it like this?" Naruto suddenly asked. "I mean, with all teams with scrolls converging to the tower at the same time. If someone is without, they just have to wait in ambush. Who remains?" Sai was suddenly alert. "The two teams from Uegakuer, the Otagakuer team and..." "I think one member of Team 9, Naruto whispered softly, "unless I stole the scrolls from someone else, and the Dakigakuer team too." "So Uegakuer, one member of Team 9, us 3, and the 3 from Dakigakuer?" Sai asked for confirmation. "Well, it could be worse." Naruto nearly bit his tongue. "Sai, Why did you have to say that? What? Puzzled, Sai raised an eyebrow. What could be worse? Yes, that one, Naruto sighed. He shook his head then, I just know you called it on us. Ryazetsu was an Umburang Kunoichi from Takigakure. The fact she was not only lithe and small, but also with a young face, had been the reason she had been chosen to pass off as a genin and enter the forest. The two teammates were genin all the same, if only to enhance the genuine feel of her team. She was rarely afraid of anything. She had faced and battled down countless missing nin, had fought through seriously crappy missions and generally had upheld the laws of Taki to her best. Yet even she had limits. She didn't even stop to plan. The moment her gaze settled on the broken corpses of her two teammates, she simply dropped all pretenses of being a genin and disappeared with the speed that only an Umbu could possess. And not a second too soon, as the Otogakure team's archer found himself cursing out loud the loss of 5 of his best arrows at the same time. The Otogakure team had 2 scrolls, it would have to suffice. The last day saw the tower's occupants make haste to the doors, readying themselves to welcome the arriving shinobi. There was silence as 3 scrolls were hurriedly settled in 3 of the 10 holes that surrounded the double doors of the tower. The next moment, the blurred form of a green spandex-wearing shinobi ran in as fast as he could, kicking the door shut behind him and holding on his shoulders a green-faced kunoichi and a utterly pissed-off Hyaganiji. Lee, let me down right now. Tenten exclaimed angrily. We're out of danger. He hasn't followed us since. Lee-kun. The scream was accompanied by a slight shriek from Tenten, as the kunoichi was dropped unceremoniously on the floor, soon followed by Niji too. The reason for this became apparent by the next scream, coming from the genin in question. Gai-san. And with those words Rock Lee went to crush-hug Mato Gai, who crush-hugged him back. Lee. Gai-sensei. Lee. Gai-sensei. Somebody, dispel that genjutsu. Kakashi coughed out slightly at the general mutter was the same around the other jounin. Well then, congratulations, now if you would. 3 more scrolls were suddenly inserted, resulting in the doors opening wide once more to admit Team 13. Yojao Izuki actually felt pride at watching her 3 students stroll in, accompanied by a 4th one who simply moved to a corner and declared herself to have failed calmly. She didn't as much as give another glance to the crimson-eyed girl, instead simply flickering down and stopping in front of the 3. Ah, it's him. The scream of Rock Lee was soon met with the green spandex genin running as far as possible from Naruto himself. Save yourself. The look of utter surprise on the rest of the present shinobi was equal, if not of fear, coming from both Niji Hyuga and Tenten, who slowly inched away from the arriving team. Sakura coughed slightly, holding onto her neck wound that was badly itching by then. Sai too looked pale, as he carefully seemed to be leaning on Naruto, who was supporting him through. Infirmary, all 3 of you, Yojao deadpanned, even as she realized Naruto was completely unscathed. Then again. And a report, later. Yes, sensei, Naruto mumbled while nodding, before helping Sai out of the room. The doors slowly were opened once more as a mixed team came in. 1 member from the Takigakure group firmly held the scroll, followed by 1 member of the Uegakure team and 2 from the Otogakure group. Very well, Kakashi coughed once more to get everyone's attention. All participants, to the infirmary. The winners may come back here afterwards to receive further news. Inform your jounin sensei of the last known location of your teammates' bodies if they died, or where they are hiding if still alive. Kakashi I smiled once more. It will be all for the moment. Well done in surviving the second part of the exam, all of you. And with those words, the second exam was officially brought to a close. Orochimaru-sama. A voice whispered in the darkness. We have succeeded. Well done, the Snake Sunin remarked. Very well done, Kidomaru, Tewa. What of the distractions? The Kiri shinobi were annihilated all but 1, the Kyuubi's Jinhiriki strength is ascertained. The Ichibai container was killed. Very well then, Orochimaru said calmly. The loss of the Ichibai changed nothing, if not that it forced his hand with the Kaze cage. I will warn the rest of the organization. Operation Breadcrumbs begins now. The Snake Sunin closed contact, letting his image shimmer away. The bigger picture. Orochimaru's golden eyes settled on the map of the elemental countries. His right hand opened like a palm over Konoha, the 5 fingers spread evenly. Fools, he breathed out. Utter fools. He chuckled. A sickening laughter soon escaped his mouth. I will show them what it means, to lose all that is precious to them. Your precious village will crumble to dust, sensei. I warned you once. I told you twice. And thrice did the world try and stop this. With his hands' nails, he clawed the map, leaving behind deep gashes. Now, once more, the price will be paid. You will not listen? Then I will force you to. Listen to the screams of the world, sensei. Listen as I drown in an ocean of flames and blood all that you cherish. He broke through the sides of his tent, to watch at the amassed forces of his village, the village of sound, preparing for war. In a month. He whispered to himself, gazing at the lines of tents. In a month. He sighed. Let there be war. And as he clenched his right fist up in the sky, he laughed even louder, the moon's unyielding presence a constant reminder of the bigger picture, at least, to his madness-filled brain. Check the description for the links to the author.